I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In the name of God, Amen. We, whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, Defender of the Faith, etc., having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith, and the honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents, solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic, for our better ordering and preservation, and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof do enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and officers, from time to time, as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. In witness whereof we have hereunto subscribed our names at Cape Cod, the 11th of November, in the reign of our sovereign Lord King James, of England, France, and Ireland, the 18th, and of Scotland the 54th, Anno Domini, 1620.
The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I called to the Lord who is worthy of praise, and I have been saved from my enemies. The cords of death entangled me, the torrents of destruction overwhelmed me, the cords of the grave coiled around me, the snares of death confronted me. In my distress I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. From his temple he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. The earth trembled and quaked, and the foundations of the mountains shook. They trembled because he was angry. Smoke rose from his nostrils. Consuming fire came from his mouth. Burning coals blazed out of it. He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his covering, his canopy around him. the dark rain clouds of the sky. Out of the brightness of his presence, clouds advanced, with hailstones and bolts of lightning. The Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded. He shot his arrows and scattered the enemy. With great bolts of lightning he routed them. The valleys of the sea were exposed, and the foundations of the earth laid bare at your rebuke, Lord, at the blast of breath from your nostrils. He reached down from on high and took hold of me. He drew me out of deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemy, from my foes who were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my disaster, but the Lord was my support. He brought me out into a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me.
In Congress, July 4, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such forms as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government.
I'm not trying to impress you. I'm just trying to impress upon you. I'm like you. I'm no better than you. You know, I'm a 960 SAT guy.
Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions, with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert. Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. As they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring towards him. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands.
I've served this country for 14 years in the Congress, and before that in the service. I have just as high a devotion, just as high an opinion. What I downgrade, Mr. Nixon, is the leadership the country's getting, not the country. Now, I didn't make most of the statements that you said I made. I believe the Soviet Union is first in outer space. We may have made more shots, but the size of their rocket thrust and all the rest. You yourself said to Khrushchev, you may be ahead of us in rocket thrust, but we're ahead of you in color television, in your famous discussion in the kitchen. I think that color television is not as important as rocket thrust. Secondly, I didn't say we had the worst slums in the world. I said we had too many slums, and that they are bad, and we ought to do something about them, and we ought to support housing legislation, which this administration has opposed. I didn't say we had the worst education in the world. What I said was that 10 years ago, we were producing twice as many scientists and engineers as the Soviet Union, and today they're producing twice as many as we are, and that this affects our security around the world. And fourth, I believe that the polls and other studies and votes in the United Nations and anyone reading the paper and any citizen of the United States must come to the conclusion that the United States no longer carries the same image of a vital society on the move with its brightest days ahead as it carried a decade or 2 decades ago. Part of that is because we've stood still here at home, because we haven't met our problems in the United States, because we haven't had a moving economy.
If we look to the answer as to why for so many years we achieved so much, prospered as no other people on earth, it was because here in this land we unleashed the energy and individual genius of man to a greater extent than has ever been done before. Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth. The price for this freedom at times has been high, but we have never been unwilling to pay that price. Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look. The sloping hills of Arlington National Cemetery, with its row upon row of simple white markers. Under one such marker lies a young man, Martin Treptow, who left his job in a small-town barber shop in 1917 to go to France with the famed Rainbow Division. There on the Western Front, he was killed trying to carry a message between battalions under heavy artillery fire. We're told that on his body was found a diary. On the flyleaf, under the heading, "My Pledge," he had written these words: "America must win this war. Therefore I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice. I will endure. I will fight cheerfully and do my utmost as if the issue of the whole struggle depended on me alone. We must realize that no arsenal or no weapon in the arsenals of the world is so formidable as the will and moral courage of free men and women. It is a weapon our adversaries in today's world do not have. It is a weapon that we as Americans do have. Let that be understood by those who practice terrorism and prey upon their neighbors. As for the enemies of freedom, those who are potential adversaries, they will be reminded that peace is the highest aspiration of the American people. We will negotiate for it, sacrifice for it. We will not surrender for it now or ever. We are Americans.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumph of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeat in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
The Lord is with me. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? The Lord is with me. He is my helper. I look in triumph on my enemies. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in humans. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in princes. All the nations surrounded me, but in the name of the Lord I cut them down. They surrounded me on every side, but in the name of the Lord I cut them down. They swarmed around me like bees, but they were consumed as quickly as burning thorns. In the name of the Lord I cut them down. I was pushed back and about to fall, but the Lord helped me. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation.
The poorest way to face life is to face it with a sneer. There are many men who feel a kind of twisted pride and cynicism. There are many who confine themselves to criticism of the way others do what they themselves dare not even attempt. There is no more unhealthy being, no man less worthy of respect than he who either really holds or feigns to hold an attitude of sneering disbelief toward all that is great and lofty, whether in achievement or in that noble effort which, even if it fails, comes to second achievement. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who, at the best, knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who, at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat.
Too many of us think it is impossible. Too many think it is unreal. But that is a dangerous, defeatist belief. It leads to the conclusion that war is inevitable, that mankind is doomed, that we are gripped by forces we cannot control. We need not accept that view. Our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man, and man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again. Surely the opening vistas of space promise high costs and hardships, as well as high reward. So it is not surprising that some would have us stay where we are a little longer, to rest, to wait. But this city of Houston, this state of Texas, this country of the United States was not built by those who waited and rested and wished to look behind them. This country was conquered by those who move forward, and so will space. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In the name of God, Amen. We, whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, Defender of the Faith, etc., having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith, and the honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents, solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic, for our better ordering and preservation, and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof do enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and officers, from time to time, as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. In witness whereof we have hereunto subscribed our names at Cape Cod, the 11th of November, in the reign of our sovereign Lord King James, of England, France, and Ireland, the 18th, and of Scotland the 54th, Anno Domini, 1620.
The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I called to the Lord who is worthy of praise, and I have been saved from my enemies. The cords of death entangled me, the torrents of destruction overwhelmed me, the cords of the grave coiled around me, the snares of death confronted me. In my distress I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. From his temple he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. The earth trembled and quaked, and the foundations of the mountains shook. They trembled because he was angry. Smoke rose from his nostrils, consuming fire.
I'm your boogeyman. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to American Advocates. This will actually be episode 194, believe it or not. I've been so off in my count on how many live episodes I've done that the last time I went live, I said it was episode 160, I think. I don't know how that happened, but I went through and officially counted all of the live episodes, subtracting the members-only ones, which we don't count, as well as the one time where my live stream was cut off and I had to do a episode 1.2 version of it. I guess we're at 194 if I counted right, so who knows anymore, but we're going with it. Episode 194, approaching 200 episodes. Sounds cooler that way, and I'm going to start putting the number of the episode number on the thumbnails now from now on, so I never lose count again. That being said, episode 194, my God, I'm losing count already. Episode 194 coming to you guys live on August 19th, 2026, and we've got a lot to get into. I took off yesterday evening, obviously, so there was a bit of a gap on what I obviously wanted to talk about last night, the loss of James Fishback. Very disappointing, and there's no way around that, obviously. I'm not going to pretend like I wasn't hoping James Fishback would very, very clearly win in Florida as the GOP primary gubernatorial candidate. He obviously didn't. He came up short, and for that matter, came up very short. But we are going to get into that tonight. I wanted to wait, and the reason why I didn't go live last night was because I really wanted to wait for a lot of data to come out regarding the election last night, the primaries in Florida, before I get into it, so that I have a better picture of what's happening strategically and what to look for in the future. And I will say this when it comes to this, but because we're going to talk about Turkey coming under fire from Israel first. We're going to get into the geopolitical segment first, because that is a major development taking place in the Middle East. It happened last night as well. But on the topic of Fishback, I will say this: the loss is bitter, but the future is bright. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later. I also may have bit off a little more I can chew, trying to talk about three things tonight. You'll see in the title I want to talk about Linsay Clancy as well, this murder trial case going on where this psychotic woman strangled all three of her children after sending her husband to the drugstore, CVS, to go pick up something or other, and then of course tried to, I guess, jump out of her bedroom window and kill herself and failed and whatever else. And wow, what a crazed phenomenon this is turning into with women. And it is startling, and it's just disturbing my soul. And I'm just going to go off on a rant at the end of this episode, if there's time. And I really want there to be time, because I'll never pass up the opportunity to, of course, rant about feminism and women and how they're destroying this nation. But I may have bit off more than I can chew, because I have a lot I want to say about Fishback. And also there is a decent amount to cover here, and a lot that I want to analyze about what's going on in the Middle East. And this is not going to be a United States of America-centric coverage tonight. In fact, I probably won't even be really mentioning the U.S. or Trump all that much tonight at all. Because what's happening right now is Israel has launched a strike against Turkey. And I'm using those words carefully. They didn't hit Turkey, the country. They launched a strike against Turkey. We're going to get into that. But first, of course, be sure to like the stream, double tap your phone screen, or hit the thumbs up button if you're watching on the horizontal stream. It's free to do, and it does help encourage YouTube's algorithm to push this show out to a lot more eyes and a lot more people who desperately need to see this kind of information. Also, be sure to subscribe to American Advocates right now. Stop what you're doing, literally, and subscribe to my channel, especially if this is not your first time watching it. That's also free to do, and it does help the channel grow continuously on top of it. Want to also thank David Cooper for renewing your separatist reactionary movement membership on this channel. I appreciate that a lot, man. And I see Adamonicus attempts in the horizontal stream. Be aware, by the way, I am multicasting, so whatever format you prefer, you can check on my channel and click on. I'm streaming both vertically, which is better for cell phones and does show up on a different feed on YouTube, therefore has a different chat. And I'm also streaming horizontally, as if you're watching a video on your computer or tablet or television. And if that's you, you may want to check out that stream. It does have a also different chat in it. In the horizontal chat, Adamonicus attempts. Good to see you in the chat, my guy. He's one of the regulars on this channel. He says, most hyped I've ever felt watching. Felt the patriotism rising in my soul, especially the Mayflower Compact. Oh, you're talking about the pre-show. Yeah. Which I've always shared that with my wife and family, as you should, and as a lot more Americans need to hear. Because, wow, do they not like to listen to that one, some of them. Talks just a little too much about God, you know. But I appreciate that, Adamonicus. Good to see you in there. Good to see David Cooper in the chat as well. All right, guys, let's get into this. So, and I still, believe it or not, as long as I made everybody endure the pre-show tonight, the starting soon screen on top of it, not everything is as neat and tidy tonight when it comes to lining up the videos to show you guys on the screen. So there may be extra seconds needed here for readjustment. But I do want to say this regarding Israel, Turkey, and as it turns out, Syria. Israel has been publicly notifying the world, America especially, of course, because they lean on us and rely on us to do all of their dirty work as the Shabbos Goy to them that we are, and that as they treat us as, especially when Republicans, sadly, being Republicans, are in office. Israel's been planning a war now with Turkey forever. This is not even a secret. They publicly say it, and they always publicly say it. And they also talk about Egypt as well being another future potential target of theirs, because they're insisting, and not even completely inaccurately so, that Muslims are increasing in influence and power in Egypt. It's not even that it's not true. It's just the bigger picture in all of this and what Israel's real motives are behind targeting these countries is becoming more obvious to more people in this age of information that we live in, this age. The internet, etc., has really exposed their agenda, their policies, their government, their actions, etc. And I warned about this on my channel just a few days, really, after President Donald Trump started the war with Iran. And it wasn't because, in this case, I was acting as a prophet or messenger of God. I was just warning about it based off of what they were saying. It's not like I sat here, as brilliant as I've been throughout the course of this entire Iran war in many ways. Not even I sat here and said, you know, this is probably more of an elaborate plan to get the U.S. re-involved in the Middle East so that after we do deal with Iran, we can be moved right into Turkey. I didn't even need to try to sit down and strategize or think that out. And truthfully, to be honest with you, because I'm such a humble guy, I'll even freely admit that when the Iran war started, I wasn't even thinking all that much about Turkey, despite knowing that, of course, Israel has a grudge with them. All I had to do simply to warn everybody on this channel within the first week of this war with Iran that Turkey was going to be next on our hit list as ordered by Israel was listen to Israel. I know that that's such a ridiculous concept for some people to fathom, but they're actually remarkably honest in their own media and on their own televisions and etc., and their own social media channels, etc. They're remarkably honest, knowing that most Americans won't ever view it. So you can read the Jerusalem Post, which is kind of printed with American viewership in mind, but you can read a lot of their own newspaper articles, online articles from Israel. You can watch their news. You can tune in to their channels and watch their politicians speak. And boy, they don't even try to hide anything. So I had heard it there. Literally. I think I had even seen a post on Twitter from like Ben Gvir or something. And I literally just went live that day and I said, hey, listen, Israel is going to drag us into perpetual war now that we're back in full force in the Middle East dealing with Iran. I warned about it on the first week. So I've been vindicated once again, but it wasn't even that remarkable of a prediction on my end. I'm not even going to sit here and bask in glory like I usually do, because anybody paying attention even for just 5 minutes a day in regards to what Israel is planning and what they're saying would have been able to say this and now look correct, which is what I am, but it's not about that. And here's the deal with this, by the way. when I was making that prediction in the first week of March, I was streaming off my cell phone, didn't have screen share capabilities. Now I do. As you can see, I've upgraded a little bit here, reset up the studio, and as a result, I can screen share. So don't just take my word for it when I say this, that this is what Israel wants. Take the word of Jonathan Pollard. Jonathan Pollard, he's a famous, notorious, I should say, infamous, I should say, U.S. Israel spy, the kind of guy that was, I believe, born in Texas, if I remember correctly, and wound up getting a job in intelligence here in the United States, despite being refused prior law enforcement work because of mental stability issues, and ultimately wound up feeling like he was called home to Israel, in his own words, and served in our U.S. Intelligence community for several years, spying on us on behalf of Israel and sending them what is described as an entire office room stacked from floor to ceiling worth of secret intelligence and files and paperwork to Israel. He did. He was ultimately found guilty of it too by a judge and actually sentenced to life in prison. But that was obviously changed under, if I remember right, Obama, who actually freed him but gave him the condition of being forced to stay in America. And then if I remember it right, it was actually Trump who allowed him to leave America and go back to Israel, where he was given a hero's welcome and is essentially like, lionized over in Israel now. Here's what Jonathan Pollard has had to say about this. This is what I'm literally telling you guys. This is Jonathan Pollard talking about it.
I'm not so sure that we will have as easy a time with the Turks as we've had with the Iranians. I've been following Turkish military doctrine, and
the strongest army in the Middle East.
The storm is coming.
Yes, of course. And they're a member of NATO.
And even worse, they're a member of NATO. So I look at Iran as a problem we absolutely have to finish, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Gaza, same thing, and the Hezbollah. Why am I fixated on this now? Because we have to be prepared for the next war, which will be probably against Turkey and Egypt. I'm not so sure.
So there you go. He's literally just calling it out in the open. We have to prepare for this. It will definitely be against, probably, he says, against Turkey and Egypt. Now, he's like not quite worshipped over in Israel, but boy, do they love Jonathan Pollard, and he definitely has sway and influence, and also seems to always have pretty good information about which direction or what the plan of Israel actually is. And that's what I mean by they just say it openly. They're not hiding this. It's not a secret. It's just out there. And most Americans either choose to not accept it or listen to it or don't even know that it's happening. They read their Schofield Bibles, and so they can't fathom the fact that this is actually how Israel moves and operates. Of course it is, though. And so it's not just that, but in addition to what Jonathan Pollard literally has to say, the truth is, and this is what I want to get to, Israel, like I was alluding to a few minutes ago, didn't directly attack Turkey yesterday. They attacked Syria, actually, which is just south of Turkey, of course. And what they essentially did was they struck Syria's Abu al-Duhair air base. This is right near the Turkish border, and they did this yesterday on August 18th, damaging several runways and creating, some explosive effects here. Now, what wound up happening was after these strikes, Israel wound up basically going on to say that they did these strikes. They aimed these strikes at the Abu al-Duhair air base near the Turkish border to stop what they said was a planned Turkish troop deployment there, which is in Syria, obviously not in Turkey. Now, a Turkey delegation had visited that location the day prior to these strikes from Israel. But the delegation left. It was a peace delegation. There was perhaps some negotiations taking place, some sightseeings for some reason, but they left. They were already gone. And Turkey has since gone on to reject the claims by Israel of this troop deployment as being untenable. And so that's all happening here. And in addition to that, this was the statement that was put out by the Syrian foreign minister, This was the Syrian foreign minister who put out this statement right here. I'm going to show you that as well. So the Syrian foreign minister, Asad al-Shaibani, told Axios that Israel had no justification for bombing the Abu al-Duhair air base, saying that Damascus had explicitly informed Israel that no Turkish base or permanent Turkish troop deployment was planned there. Israel nevertheless dropped at least 8 bombs on the site, damaging newly rebuilt runways and hangars. Al-Shaibani said the base was largely empty and being rehabilitated for Syria's air force, though Turkish officers had visited previously as part of a broader military cooperation. He said Damascus warned Washington that it does not trust Israel's intentions and accused Israel of backing away from a security agreement reached on paper after a year of U.S.-mediated talks. Now, here's the deal with this. In order to really understand what's going on here, you have to understand the history of Syria in the Middle East, at least going as far back into the 1970s, which of course will take way too long for me to get into details on this channel. I do recommend reading up on it because most Americans are not aware of it. In summary, in the most short form possible, I will explain briefly to you that Syria is essentially another great example of the United States listening to Israel and their intelligence and acting off of it. Basically, we got involved in Syria, and in my opinion, we shouldn't have, and it'll go down as another list of failures of the Bush and Obama administration, for that matter, collectively. The entire 2000s is just set up with this. We had Afghanistan, we had Iraq, then we had Syria, and this is sort of the order that I recollect being the correct order of events and how it took place. But even before the 2000s, when the U.S. was really starting to get heavily involved, a lot of the history of Syria goes back into the 70s and really the early 80s, when the Syrians were sort of ousted from Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, and all of southern Lebanon by Israel, after tensions had been building between Syria and Israel in the late 70s and early 1980s over Lebanon relations. Israel was trying to essentially make some sort of peace type deal with Lebanon. Syria wasn't thrilled about it. Syria had occupants in Lebanon. Israel wasn't thrilled about that. Israel has their military doctrine set up that essentially states that they will never tolerate Muslims near their borders, which you can of course see inherently how big of a problem that is, since we gave the Jews Israel in 1948 after it was formerly known as Palestine, and we planted them all in there amongst a lot of Muslims. Nevertheless, they ousted the Syrians from southern Lebanon and Beirut, the capital, and as a result of this in the 1980s, at the time, the president al-Assad wound up developing chemical weapons to create what he referred to as a balance of terror between Israel and Syria. They had been kicked out, they had been driven out, they understood what Israel was all about, and they recognized that while they had a presence in Damascus, they couldn't stand up to Israel directly at that point in time, so they wound up moving towards creating the means to be able to do that. It's basically a deterrent, is how we refer to it. But at that time, he of course referred to it as a balance of terror between Israel and Syria. Syria wound up going on to actually do just that. They developed a nerve agent at the time that wound up being 500 times as toxic as cyanide. And what they did with this nerve agent was they then took it and managed to essentially attach it to a warhead. They created this warhead to be able to use it as a chemical weapon mass destruction. They took the warhead and they used it. They used it in combination with the Soviet Union's 1970 Scud missiles, and boom, they all of a sudden wound up having their balance of terror between Israel and Syria. But not easily, of course, because Israel at the time took note of this taking place in Syria after ousting them from Lebanon, and they weighed the options of preemptively striking. Where have you heard that term before, by the way? We use it all the time now that we're allied with our best buddy Israel when it comes to Iran. And so all throughout the course of the 1980s and into the 90s for that matter, Israel was growing anxious and angry at Syria and what they were doing, and they weighed the options of preemptively striking Syria over the construction, essentially, of this new nerve agent that they then used to create chemical weapons of mass destruction, is what it was called. But it's funny how deterrents tend to work really well. Fences make good neighbors, is the saying, and when you're living in a neighborhood, of course. Unfortunately, in the Middle East, it's a lot more violent and barbaric, so weapons of mass destruction tend to make good neighbors in the Middle East. It's sort of why Iran was possibly on that path as well, in recognition of this in the modern day. Syria recognized this. They moved quickly. They developed the nerve agent. They created the chemical weapon of mass destruction. Israel said, should we preemptively just strike them? But they got nervous, and they concluded that it was too risky to do so because they weren't really sure how many chemical weapons of mass destruction Syria had already produced. Isn't that something? Isn't that something how, oh, we're going to bomb the fuck out of Syria. Wait, they might actually be able to hurt us back. Oh, well, in that case, maybe we shouldn't bomb them. It's amazing how that works. And of course, what happens next? Well, Syria continues, of course, to refine its chemical weapons all throughout the 1990s. But funny enough, it was during the 90s where they also stated their intention. Having created the deterrent, having created what they referred to as equal terrorist, what did they call it? A balance of terror between Israel and Syria. Having all of this be essentially accomplished, they actually wound up reaching out to Israel and seeking out peace negotiations. And this is kind of what defined the whole 1990s between at least Syria and Israel to some degree, this idea of them coming together to form a peace deal. And it was actually almost reached, the peace deal between Israel and Syria, during the Clinton administration with a meeting that took place, if I remember right, in West Virginia. And after hours of delegating and negotiating, a peace deal was reportedly a hair split away from actually taking place, but for some reason ultimately did not come into fruition. Now, I think that was in January 1997. June 1997, President Assad winds up dying. The Syrian president who created the chemical weapons and as a deterrent for Israel and was seeking out peace. The peace deal fails. President Assad dies literally about 6 months later and wound up being succeeded by his son, Bashar. Assad Jr., I guess we can call him. Elder Assad dies. He's succeeded by his son, Bashar. Now, here's the deal. And this is, again, I'm trying to summarize this very quickly because a lot of people aren't aware of this. Before Elder Assad, President Assad had died after failing to create a peace deal with Israel. We wind up, or not we, I should say, but reports wind up being put out into the fray that Hafez al-Assad wound up basically dying, but not before entering into talks with North Korea about a highly secretive program to build a nuclear reactor in western Syria. You can, of course, see where all that wound up going, right? Oh my God, Syria has nukes, essentially is how I can best describe that for you. And if you're a millennial or even a Gen Xer at this point, or Gen Zer especially, then you just insert the eye roll, right? The CIA, of course, winds up getting involved. Mossad gets involved. They hack some sort of a laptop of a Syrian national, of a Syrian higher-up political figure in London, and they basically take that information and they approach the United States, and they say, look at this. These are the plans of a nuclear reactor in Syria. One thing leads to another. A general named General Soleimani winds up getting assassinated in his home in Syria. He reportedly was overseeing the nuclear reactor. And next thing you know, protests wind up rising up in Syria. Protests for democracy. And what does the Syrian government do? They crush the protests. The evil Syrian government, and if what they did is true, then yes, evil Syrian government winds up killing protesters, and all kinds of intel comes out that suggests that the Syrian government was torturing babies, I guess. And this, of course, leads to the then appetite for civil war, which breaks out in Syria in 2011, and all of a sudden, there's an appetite for regime change. They're torturing babies. They're quelling protests for democracy. Something must be done. Obama publicly demonizes Assad Jr., basically, Bashar al-Assad. He publicly demonizes him, publicly criticizes him, and says he should just step down. And that's basically what winds up leading to a free Syrian army rising up. A Free Syrian Army rises up. It's formed during this time and ultimately very quickly winds up being backed by not just the United States, but also many other Gulf states and Turkey. They wind up backing this Free Syrian Army, which winds up operating. There's a couple of different factions that rise up in there because jihadist groups also wind up entering Syria and getting involved in this. And we're talking about groups that like ISIS, for instance, as well as a group predominantly called the HTS. And the HTS is ultimately what wound up creating the change that we now have in Syria. Russia and Iran, of course, at this time wound up also propping up Assad and trying to keep him in power and supporting him. But a figure rises up at this time named Abu Muhammad al-Golani. And you may not recognize that name or know it because he doesn't even go by that name anymore. But Abu Muhammad al-Golani, from Al-Qaeda, literally, and having ISIS ties too, rises up to lead the HTS freedom-fighting rebels who are backed by the U.S. and Turkey. He winds up toppling Assad in December of 2024 and is essentially planted in, therefore, subsequently as the new leader of Syria. And upon succeeding in his efforts to effect regime change and topple the Syrian government and become the new leader, he winds up changing his name from Abu Muhammad al-Golani, Al-Qaeda agent, essentially, because of the Al-Qaeda and ISIS ties, and he changes his name to Ahmed al-Sharaa. And he does this, of course, to shed his former jihadist ties and gain legitimacy. And now here we are. Now we're back in the modern day. That's a brief summary, by the way. I encourage all people to go back and read that. It actually is very important to understand what happened in Syria and why it's significant. Syria lies south of Turkey, but north of Lebanon and Israel, and Jordan for that matter. And at this point, it's starting to look like, based off of how the geopolitical landscape is drastically shifting in the Middle East as a result of this newfound war between the United States and Iran that Israel seems to be watching from the sidelines and enjoying while eating their popcorn, it seems like Israel actually might be missing Assad, weirdly enough. The same Assad that their Mossad intelligence community, in combination with the CIA, seemingly worked so hard for decades to topple. And the reason why they might be missing Assad and the former leadership is because its new leader, who has literally Al-Qaeda and ISIS ties, seems to be possibly just as resistant to the idea of Israel as the old ones anyway, and is actually perhaps smarter because he is openly working with Turkey now, or giving off the appearance of considering doing so. And Turkey is, of course, interested in Syria for a multitude of reasons. Turkey, like I said, is north of Syria. Syria is south of Turkey. They border each other. Turkey, first of all, is looking to essentially get money back on their investment when they essentially, alongside the United States and the Persian Gulf, supported the freedom fighter movement that took charge in the civil war in Syria and ultimately wound up toppling the regime. Turkey has multiple goals now because during the Syrian civil war, there was a multitude of different occurrences that took place. It wasn't just the HTS or, the jihadists necessarily that were rising up to topple the Syrian government and leadership. The Kurds also wound up getting involved. Kurdish rebels are now still active in Syria to some degree, and they're very close to the border of Turkey, and the Turks and the Kurds do not get along. So they want to crush the Kurdish rebels near the border of Syria and Turkey. They view them as a pestilence. But beyond that, they want to also re-secure their influence in Damascus. Again, they want to secure this influence in Damascus and basically have control of the center of the Middle East more, as well as more of Syria, which is, of course, closer to Israel. They also want to explore oil and gas options there. And that's really what leads me up into this point in time even more so, because I've already explained the rising trilateral Mecca NATO, as I've called it. Mecca NATO, as I've called it, is the now trilateral faction that was formed just recently during this Iran war between Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey. And as I've explained, this trilateral faction was formed for a multitude of reasons. amongst these three prominent Middle East countries lies varying different strengths. What they bring to the table is uniquely different, in fact. We're talking about Turkey, but to briefly summarize the strengths and advantages and what each nation brings to the table, it essentially goes like this. Saudi Arabia is part of it. They have the money and the wealth and some of the resources. And they have the money because of the resources. They're obviously oil rich, very large, influential country in the Middle East. They have all of the oil. They have all of the wealth. They're loaded. So that's what they bring to the table. Pakistan, of course, to the east, winds up bringing literally nuclear weapons to the table. They have the nukes, literally. So Pakistan is being viewed as valuable to the group for that reason. They're also, of course, clashing with India right now, too, on top of it. And then there's Turkey, and they have what many believe to be currently, perhaps at least, the most powerful army in the Middle East that resides there. And by that I mean, of course, the United States is there, but rightfully so, they're beginning to even question just how powerful we actually are after all, first of all. But second of all, we're not obviously supposed to be staying there, or we really shouldn't be. It's not like we border any of those countries. So when it comes to the countries actually in the Middle East, Turkey has a powerful army, very large, powerful, substantial, and really advanced army for that matter. So when you take those three together and you combine them, you understand really what it's all about, just from a standpoint of power and economics. Saudi Arabia has the funds and some of the resources like oil that are necessary and crucial for any movement or group or alliance. Pakistan has the nukes, which is the deterrent, and Turkey has the armed forces and the advanced military. You can see Saudi Arabia, they're not all that good when it comes to military forces. They've been bothered and sort of actually in some ways really damaged by the Houthis, who are an overrated group of, Yemeni rebels that are backed by Iran, of course. But Saudi Arabia is wealthy and rich with resources. They're not necessarily notorious, though, for having a strong armed forces. That's Turkey. So these three come together in Mecca NATO, and they copy NATO and the agreement sort of outright, at least when it comes to Article 5, which of course states that an attack on one is an attack on all. This was just formed a few weeks ago, and at the time I did an episode on this, or half of an episode rather, and I mentioned it, and I discussed what my opinions were and my straight up thoughts were, and I said, obviously, this trilateral movement is happening right now because of the U.S. war with Iran. Faith has been shaken in the United States, and many countries are beginning to look to a future Middle East region without United States influence, or at least with way less of it. Some of our bases have been permanently destroyed, it seems, in Bahrain and Kuwait, and we've sustained heavy damage in the region of Jordan as well as a result of Iranian attacks. And we've really demonstrated that though we do have, to some degree, a still very large, influential, and powerful presence in military, perhaps it's not as effective in the Middle East as many of the countries were sold that it was. And in recognition of this, and in watching Iran's strategy unfold and how they've been able to really resist, and in some cases even straight up propel the United States away from their borders and push us back using just cheap munitions like ballistic missiles and drones, a lot of countries are now beginning to take a look around and try to figure out what their next best move is if the United States actually can't deliver for them when it comes to protection and military force. So that's first and foremost, and that's of course obvious. But in addition to that, I also covered, of course, that if we're looking at a world where soon the United States is no longer as influential in the Middle East or as powerful in the Middle East region specifically, this could create a power vacuum. We have hundreds of military bases located all around the Middle East, and our military may have peaked in the 90s, but we've maintained a strong presence in that region, certainly throughout the 2000s as well, and a lot of countries got used to that over time as a result. That may be going away. President Donald Trump doesn't have a good answer for Iran, and as I've mentioned several times on this channel and outright predicted at the start of this war, he's been defeated. This war is over. We're in the end game really right now, but it's also really truly just over at this point, unless Trump is looking to go way further than he should, and I just did a video on that, live stream on that the other night. But even if he does that, there's no guarantee of success, and in fact, I would say it's almost certain that if he nukes Iran, he still won't succeed. And in many cases will make everything worse. How worse is really a startling question to ask, and I went over that on a prior live episode just the other night, which is again why you should like the stream right now. Double tap your phone screens, hit the thumbs up button, it's free to do, and subscribe to the channel so you always get to tune in and watch some of the best analysis you'll ever hear. That being said, of course, Trump is defeated, and these countries are now beginning to recognize this and take a look around at the future. So they form this trilateral movement, this Mecca NATO, in essence to account for what could be a future power vacuum in the Middle East without the U.S. presence and dominance in the region anymore. Because obviously Iran, because they're stating that as their demand, that the U.S. withdraw from the Persian Gulf region and have nothing left to do in the region. Obviously, Iran wants that, and the second that that happens, Iran fully controls the Strait of Hormuz with no issue. They grow in power and influence in the Middle East over the next 10 years. They have the Houthis, they have Hamas, they have Hezbollah already. And so they would be seeking, in my opinion, to obviously expand their power. Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia recognize this, so they have formed a counter to that. And that's essentially what I analyzed when the trilateral Mecca NATO was announced. What I also covered, though, that perhaps a lot of people won't recognize or fathom even, is that the group wasn't just formed to account for a power vacuum in a post-Middle East world without the United States presiding over it. It wasn't just formed to counter and balance out Iran. It was formed as well to keep an eye on Israel and act as a deterrence to Israel. And this is the other thing that's obviously very, very open and out there and well known. Everyone in the Middle East knows Israel is a potential problem. Their thirst for greater Israel is unstoppable, actually. It is like their only goal. They're obsessed with it. They have no concept, for as smart as they say the Jews are, and I do give them props, they're smart. That is true. They seem to have no capabilities of grasping what secondary or tertiary consequences are, because if they did, they wouldn't quite be acting the way that they're acting now. They only are focused on the primary consequence or result of their actions, which is why they give off the appearance now more than ever of being obsessed with their goal of greater Israel. It's very obvious, and it's out there in the open. Their obvious ability to manipulate the United States into serving their interests is also unfortunately being made very clear recently as well, and every country is taking note of this, especially the ones in the Middle East. And again, the new reality that America won't be established in the Middle East going forward is a massive issue. I explained the power vacuum there too, the lack of U.S. security maybe, as well as Iran, but Israel preventative measures is the one that people won't focus on when it comes to this Mecca NATO. So, after Turkey backing Turkey backing the involvement in Syria throughout, the regime change effort process in the civil war, like I said, they want a return on their investment. And they also view Syria strategically. This is also important to note. It's not just about oil, gas, reclaiming or taking Damascus to some, not reclaiming, I should say, but developing a strong presence in Damascus once again. It's not even just about that, or even eliminating the Kurds from their borders. Like I explained, geographically, Syria lies south of Turkey. And Israel, as I showed you with Jonathan Pollard there, Israel is very clear over the fact that they want a war with Turkey. They're not hiding that. They want the war with Turkey, and they believe that they need that war with Turkey because it's part of greater Israel. So, same with Egypt for that matter. And so, with Syria being south of Turkey and north of Israel, it provides a massive buffer zone, potentially, for Turkey. And this is no different than how Israel uses what they call their yellow line strategy, which we've seen play out in Lebanon, for instance. Israel waits to be attacked and then looks for the excuse to use that to justify their expansion. And what they do is, for instance, they goad the United States on February 20th to ultimately attack Iran on February 28th with our Navy and Air Force. This, of course, is very obvious to the rest of the world. Not the Goyim here in America, the evangelical, dispensationalist Goyim Christian fools here in America. They don't get it. They don't know what any of this is about. They just believe their Schofield Bible, so they think that this has to happen for the world to end, right? It's a very Jewish premillennialist belief that they've been psyoped into believing, but they don't actually really understand how Israel is operating or just what the position of Israel is when it comes to America. So it's not the case with the Middle Easterners, obviously. They have to deal with this country as a neighbor. They know exactly what's happening. And so as a result of this, we strike Iran. Everyone in the Middle East looks at that and goes, Israel manipulated Trump and America into striking Iran first. So what does Hezbollah do? They're residing in Lebanon. They're allied with Iran. They strike Israel as punishment. Well, Israel's banking on this. They've been waiting for that. Lebanon to their north. They believe that's their promised land as well. They just need the justification to start claiming it. And Hezbollah gives it to them. Hezbollah responds with fury after we strike Iran at Israel's behest. They strike Israel. Israel says, oh my God, we're being attacked. And like the perfect victims they always are, they wind up utilizing their military doctrine and tactics with the IDF to invade Lebanon. And why? They invade Lebanon because they say they must now conquer further up into Lebanon in order to develop and establish their Yellow Line region, an essential 5-mile radius up into southern Lebanon that allows what they call a buffer zone to give them advanced warning of future Hezbollah rocket attacks that could hit Israel. So they do this. They go up, they first start by airstriking the region and destroying indiscriminately every single building, churches, houses, schools, you name it. It all gets leveled by the airstrike, and what remains standing then gets combed through by IDF soldiers to ensure that there's no threat, and then ultimately they send in literally construction vehicles to finish demolishing the rubble and clearing it out. And you can see all the satellite images of Israel doing this with Gaza and Palestine in the West, wherever. You can see this online. So it's again not a secret, it's just not well known that this is how they operate. You can see before and afters of it though. And once they clear it all out, they ensure that the inhabitants can never return, which essentially makes it now new Israel territory, a part of Israel. And then they push the soldiers up to the front lines, who are then vulnerable for attack, and in some ways the cycle just can continually repeat over years. But they call it the Yellow Line. And they justify it in the name of defense. So Turkey seems to be viewing Syria in some ways the same way now. That's my opinion, at least. That's what I'm gathering here. Turkey, because Israel is so open over the fact that they want a war with Turkey, is now preparing for the future of that by eyeing up Syria, who they've already had a heavy influence on over the course of the Syrian civil war, and had a massive hand alongside the United States in basically affecting the regime change and planting in their new leader as of December 2024. They want to use Syria, in my opinion, to create a larger, more secure buffer zone against Israeli expansionism and warfare outright. And that's what I think is at play right now. They want the influence in Damascus, which is way further south into Syria, and Israel won't stand for that as part of the problem. So they launched their strikes, Israel. They tried to warn Syria that they were breaking their agreement, supposedly, that they have with Israel over this, and Syria didn't listen, and they entertained the Turkish diplomats and delegates just the other night at the airstrip that Israel wound up striking. And that's what I think is happening. I think Turkey is just viewing it not just as a potential resource kind of situation. Again, oil and gas, that plays a part for sure. But they are looking to essentially achieve, I guess, what you could refer to as greater Turkey. If Israel's going to try to push for greater Israel and constantly expand, then what we're seeing is a trilateral movement of countries, a trilateral Mecca NATO of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan coming together in acknowledgement of the fact that Iran will now be a future problem potentially, but so will Israel. And this trilateral movement between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, coincidentally, of course, keep Iran and Israel divided. This now forms this triangle smack dab in the middle of all of it. And they are looking to possibly include what would be a fourth or even possibly fifth nation into this agreement. Perhaps that actually winds up being Syria and Egypt. That will remain to be seen. Egypt seems to have lost some favor with Turkey over the past several weeks, But nevertheless, it is in the works. It is in the talks. People have also mentioned that Qatar might wind up joining it as well. So that's what they seem to be doing. It's now becoming almost this like preemptive, like expansionist sort of strategy unfolding. Greater Israel, they're hell-bent on making it happen. Now Turkey seems hell-bent on making Greater Turkey happen. That's my theory, at least. We're going to have to wait to see how all of this unfolds. But it's really what it seems like, because here is President Erdogan talking about this even. I have a video right here. This is him talking about the Israeli strikes that took place, and he's talking about Israel. You can take a look at this right now.
انظروا، نحن لا نتحدث معكم عن الحرب، بل نتحدث عن السلام. نحن نتحدث عن كيفية تحقيق السلام العالمي. ولكن إذا كان هناك من سيهاجم تركيا من أجل الحرب وليس السلام، فإن تركيا لن تتردد في خوض هذه الحرب ولن تهرب منها. وأقول ذلك
Now, obviously, that's in another language, but as it's translated, it actually is very, very almost humorous, and I think even deliberately so. Erdogan is basically repeating the same rhetoric that Israel repeats to justify their actions. He in that interview, President Erdogan is saying, listen, it's not about war, it's about peace. That's what he's saying. This whole Syria thing, it's about peace. What we're doing, we're expanding in this. It's what Israel literally says, by the way. They literally will just tell people this. They'll say, listen, we're expanding in the name of peace with our most moral army of the world. Well, there's President Erdogan in that clip I just showed you saying the same thing. Well, this Syria thing, this is about peace, not about war. However, if we have a presence in Syria and our Turkish nationals wind up being injured or killed by Israel, he goes on to say, then it's war. We're not going to shy away from that. And he says, and I say that very frankly. So he's doing kind of the same tactic. And funny enough, here's where it gets tricky. Turkey forms this Mecca NATO in the Middle East. They literally sign it at Mecca with their version of Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all between Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey. Pakistan, the nuclear deterrent, Saudi Arabia, the wealth, and Turkey also sort of the wealth, but most prominently the military, the iron fist of all of it. Well, here's where it gets complicated, and where I said this would get complicated the last time I talked about this. Turkey is also a NATO member with Article 5, and we are obviously a NATO member as well. So Turkey, in many ways, has formed this secondary type alliance with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan while still being a NATO member recognized by Europe and the United States. And this is where there's going to be true confliction taking place, a true conflict, because obviously, unfortunately too, as it currently stands, the United States is still about 80% captured by the Israel Zionist lobby. They're our greatest ally, they always remind us. Despite not being a part of NATO for obvious reasons, Israel, they always take precedent over everything. So that leads me really to the next thing I wanted to show you here, and this won't come as a surprise, and I've already said that this would be the case, and how it sort of makes Trump a bastard in my opinion, because normally I would advocate for this, but now I can't. President Donald Trump, funny enough, and I think this was literally just, well, technically yesterday now, really, but this was just today. This was literally just, what was it, Wednesday, right? Just today, Wednesday, President Donald Trump had this to say now about NATO. Take a look.
Not sticking together. I think that NATO made a terrible mistake when they wouldn't send a small amount of military armament, when they wouldn't send, just even acknowledge what we were doing for the world and taking on Iran. I never considered it very risky, but war is always risk. You know, a lot of strange things happen in war that are very bad, but but I didn't consider it. I know how great we're the greatest military by far anywhere. There was nobody close. I didn't think there was a big risk, but there's always surprises with war. They can be very bad surprises. I mean, wars are lost that should be won. Many wars are lost. You think a country is going to wipe somebody out and they end up getting wiped out themselves. So it's always risky. But I think a tremendous mistake was when NATO just wasn't there. They just weren't there. It's going to make a lot of money for the United States because we spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year on NATO, hundreds of protecting them. And we would have always been there for them. But now, based on their actions, I guess we don't have to be, do we?
Mr. President.
That sounds like a breaking story, yes, sir?
Sounds like a breaking story, he says, and it's not being reported anywhere, weirdly enough. Now, this has been hinted at as well, less strongly than Israel hints at going to war with Turkey, but still hinted at more than once by President Donald Trump. Kind of even before the Iran war, really, and at that time, that was when I actually sort of supported the notion of this based off of strict numbers and finances, because it is true, we have not been treated very well by NATO. It's true that NATO, at the original formation of NATO after World War II, was only ever intended to be a concept or an alliance for 10 years to allow Europe to get back on their feet economically after World War II, because we were then worried immediately after that Russia, having helped us win the war against Germany, of course, but nevertheless not really being our friend, it was the enemy of our enemy type situation, Russia was eager to start gobbling up Europe in their weakened and bankrupted state. And we didn't want that, obviously, because then Russia controls all of the East and they're too powerful. So we formed NATO for that reason, but with the very notion of a 10-year type thing, basically. General Eisenhower at the time even stated as much, saying that if NATO goes on longer than 10 years, it should be considered a failure and should be disbanded. But every president in the United States seemed to just want to kick that can down the road, while being taken advantage of more and more as time went on, when Europe began to realize that, well, we're getting back on our feet, but America can keep footing the bill for us. There was obvious agreements about putting in money towards defensive spending, etc., and Europe took that money instead and chose to usher in a perfect, as so many envious college kids in America would call it, a perfect utopian society over in Europe there. It's off of our money that they accomplish it, and that's why they've always sought out ways to not live up to their fair share and force America to foot the bill. And for that reason alone, I've always been mostly in support of the United States leaving NATO. That being said, recognizing where our United States roots originally come from, which is Europe, America is an extension of Christian white Europe. That was what America was founded as at its core. For that reason, of course, I want to remain allied with European countries, Britain, Ireland, Scotland, Germany, except France, etc., Italy, like that we should maintain an alliance with. Maybe not in the form of NATO, but we should not be willing to abandon our alliances with those countries. Those countries are our roots in many ways. That's first of all. And second of all, now more than ever, obviously, I don't think we should leave NATO. But why do you think, of course, Trump is now even more keen on doing that? Well, because of Israel, of course. They now started launching rockets at previously known locations where Turkish delegates were in Syria over the concept of Turkey deepening their ties with Syria. Turkey's a member of NATO. Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all. Israel is not a part of NATO. There is no formal agreement between Israel and pretty much any other country, in fact. We are the Shabbos Goy, always defending Israel for no other reason than religious fanaticism, and not even true Christianity, because it is just a bunch of evangelical dispensationalist nutjobs that can't read their Bibles correctly that believe we must protect them. We don't need to, by the way, but we do. So there's no real formal agreement between Israel and anybody, but it's always been America being the ultimate goy idiots, defending them anyway, and really prioritizing them over everybody else in the most sickening way possible. And now that Israel they still can't help themselves. They still have this appetite for conquest and expansionism, and they have the paranoia of allowing Muslims at their border to be near their borders. They're now threatening Turkey, a NATO ally. And Trump says, well, you know what? And by the way, Trump worked out a deal with NATO recently too, which has seen actually more NATO allies begin to appropriately invest in the defense budget collectively. It was actually only Spain that didn't live up to it. But all the other countries have actually begun following through on that, to their credit. And nevertheless, Trump is now pointing to the Iran war that, of course, all of our European allies refused to take part in, and with the benefit of hindsight, wisely so. Turns out, actually, sickeningly enough, all of those liberal pansy-ass gay leaders over in Europe, who we do despise, rightfully so for the most part, somehow are more nationalistic and protective over their own people and military than the United States and our leaders are. We foolishly have been sent over to the Middle East to fight in this stupid fucking war for Israel, and Europe, of all places, had the common sense to say, that looks like a death trap. No, thank you. Which, of course, they are justified technically in doing so because the United States wasn't attacked by Iran. Article 5 states an attack on one is an attack on all. That was why after 9/11, Europe did come to our aid and help us and assist us in the Afghanistan war. Though even then they did so in their own kind of pussified way, where they placed restrictions on where their soldiers could occupy in Afghanistan. And of course, those restrictions and lines drawn were north of most of the serious engagements. But they were there, to their credit, and they provided aid and supplies, and they did fight alongside our boys. But this was not an attack on America. We attacked Iran first at the behest of Israel, a non-NATO ally. So Europe was actually, technically at least on paper, however you feel about it is a different story, but they were well within their right to say no. So Trump doesn't actually really have the leg to stand on that he wants to make it seem like he does. He's just moral fagging over the fact that NATO wouldn't help us. And with the benefit of hindsight, they shouldn't have, and they didn't, and they're better off for it. But that's going to be the excuse now, I guess, to leave NATO. And in his words, it's breaking news. It's a hot story. Well, we're leaving NATO, I think, because of what's going on with Israel and Turkey. And the timing of that is not an accident. Now, here's the deal with that as well. And this is also important to point out, too. We can't just leave NATO because Trump wants to, thankfully. We actually have to get congressional approval for that. It's a peace treaty. Only Congress can basically form and create and vote on peace treaties. The president signs off on it at the end. But Trump will have to have congressional support for that. He's not going to get it even now, let alone after the midterms when it all goes blue. So it's not even likely to happen. But Trump is talking about it for a very obvious reason, and that's important to take note of. So, not a coincidence, not an accident. None of it is. All of it's planned, actually. And this whole Turkey-Israel thing is actually turning out to be way more fascinating than I thought it was, or was going to be, I should say. So we're going to see how that plays out. But that's my analysis of the region so far and what's taking place. We're going to get into our next story back here at home in America. But first, of course, if you enjoyed that analysis and appreciate it, be sure to like the stream, double tap your phone screens if you're watching on your cell phone or tablet, or if you're watching on a computer, hit the thumbs up button. That's free to do, and it does encourage YouTube's algorithm to push this show out to plenty of more people who need to see this kind of information. Also, subscribe on top of it if you enjoyed that, so you can keep coming back and be notified when I go live. You can do that by turning on post notifications, and all of that's free to do as well. For all of the so many boomers out there will literally say, well, I liked it, but I'm not subscribing because I don't have the money. It's free. Subscribing is free, I promise you. Becoming a member costs money. After you subscribe, you can then click join, which you also should do. You should become a member today and pay me every single month just to do what I'm doing. Pay me to exist, Goyam. But subscribing is free, and that's the least you can do. Turn on post notifications too, so you're notified every time I go live, which is most nights of the week. I wind up taking off a day or two every week, though. So good to see Blop Jones in the chat, and David Cooper, and TC, and Beck Fan. Thank you for the 10 gold coins, Beck Fan. That does actually translate to dollars to some degree. So I appreciate that. But yeah, we're going to get into the domestic news here too. So that's the whole Middle East thing. There's probably updates to talk about with Trump and Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, but I can only talk about that for so much before ultimately just kind of getting sick of it. It's in summary, it's just the same thing every single day. I don't know what more you want out of me on that. When something major happens, I'll cover it again. But I want to move on, and I want to get into James Fishback. James Fishback, the Florida. Well, really, I'm going to be honest, to be straight up too. I'm going to get in some varying degrees to all of the election results last night, of which I did really truly had the urge to go live last night and immediately talk about. But I wanted to wait until more data was put out, specifically for the James Fishback primaries, but in general to see the results because we were waiting on Alaska at the time too. And now we have these results, and it does paint a interesting picture, a good picture actually, a good picture if you're actually able to strategize and think in the future. That's the actual caveat there. And most people won't be able to do that. So a lot of people are going to be either disheartened by this or, black-pilled over it. But the truth is, it actually is a good thing. The results that we saw last night are good. You just have to know how to look at it correctly. And the reason why I say that is, of course, because people are disheartened in truth over the loss of James Fishback. If you're an America First conservative, then you're not thrilled. It's a very bitter moment last night watching James Fishback run what can only be described, in my opinion, as the most pure political campaign I think I've ever seen in my lifetime, sadly. He took no big donor money. He ran strictly grassroots and ran off of strictly not just America First policies, but in many ways Florida First policies, since he was running as the governor or trying to run to become governor of Florida. And you just don't really see that out of politicians nowadays. And it was a white pill in many ways. But ultimately, it wasn't meant to be, at least not yet, because Byron Donalds, of course, wound up defeating James Fishback with a pretty large, substantial lead over him. Let me pull that up real quick right now so you can see what I'm looking at here. These were the results. These were the results of the Florida governor primary election last night. You can see it's basically it's all in. Does it still say projected winner? Yeah. 99% of votes are in, though. There's about 9,000 votes remaining, so nothing's going to change, obviously, really. And you can see here Byron Donalds wound up winning over Jay Collins and James Fishback with a pretty significant lead. But there's a story to be told here. Byron Donalds wound up obtaining 47.8% of the total votes for the Republicans, Jay Collins 25.2%, and James Fishback with 10.5% of the votes. And of course, what we're seeing as a result of this, the boomer cons, the 70-year-old Republicans are rubbing in the defeat of James Fishback. The ones that have accounts online are quick to point out that the internet is not real life and that, appealing to the youth is flawed and erroneous and a waste of time, and that ultimately Byron Donalds was always going to win, resistance is futile, and the right candidate, Byron Donalds, won the primary. That's the narrative that you're seeing be pushed out by a lot of the establishment on the internet right now. While simultaneously, of course, like I said, a lot of actual young conservatives or America Firsters are very rightfully so bummed out by this loss by James Fishback, and they're definitely taking the black pill today. All day long I saw it. I saw a lot of young Republicans online saying, I voted for Fishback, he lost, I'm never voting again, fuck the boomers, Republicans deserve to lose, etc., etc. But here's what we need to remember. This is where... Firstly, this is the most important part about all of this. We have to look at this through the correct lens with the right kind of mentality and mindset that is one of strategy and futuristic thinking. And I can't emphasize that enough. And every time I've talked about James Fishback on this channel, and for that matter, every time I've talked about election strategy and being a young conservative in America, I've always been quick to point this out. A lot of people think in terms of black and white, and they don't really have a good mindset for the future. They're focused on the here and now. They're focused on, the doomer narrative and what they deem to be the immediate crisis that America is currently undergoing. So they want answers now, and they want it all fixed now. It just doesn't work that way, and it never has. Not even MAGA worked that way. More on that in a second. What we have to remember about James Fishback specifically is he had no political experience going into this. That's first of all. That's in many ways what made him a breath of fresh air, shades of Trump 2014, 2015 in some ways, actually. But remember something, he had no political experience going into this, and even more importantly, unlike any of the other candidates, James Fishback started with only $950 in his pocket. He had next to nothing funding-wise. Under $1,000 and a dream is really what it was. And meanwhile, this is what's important. This is what puts it in perspective here. And this is not, people, I've already been told this is copium. It's not, actually. Because you have to understand how significant this is and what this means for the future. Because while James Fishback started off with $950, he was running against seasoned establishment candidates. Byron Donalds, of course, is a seasoned politician. His face has been all over the political landscape, local television in Florida. He's been spotted next to Anna Paulina Luna and Marjorie Taylor Greene in the chambers of Congress. His face is already out there. His name is already well known. He was on the Breakfast Club podcast last year talking about Jasmine Crockett and how she's ghetto. So he's already been out there. He's had access to a higher caliber, the upper echelons of society, and he was endorsed by Trump himself, who lives in Florida, Mar-a-Lago. Trump publicly endorsed Byron Donalds 3 times on Truth Social, with albeit see-through copy-paste Truth Social posts, but boomers they're not perceptive enough to notice that. Trump endorsed Byron Donalds multiple times publicly and at the national level because he lives in Florida and got to vote. Then there's Jay Collins, of course, who also beat out James Fishback. Jay Collins, the lieutenant governor of Florida. He literally, the lieutenant governor of Florida, and these guys together were house names in Florida. They have the recognition needed to springboard them into the success that they saw last night. Now, Jay Collins ultimately wound up coming short too, but he more than doubled James Fishback's results. Fishback came from nothing. This is what we have to understand here. He came from nothing. And then there's the money element in all of this. Obviously, there's the notoriety, which is a huge advantage in all of this. But then there's the money. Fishback ran strictly grassroots. It's why I think he garnered so much support online and was captivating to a lot of the youth. He came from nothing, built up notoriety on the campaign trail organically, and he refused big donor money along the way. Especially from AIPAC, of course, since one of his key talking points that he ran off of was running as an anti-Israel candidate in Florida, talking about how as governor he would immediately divest Florida's $385 million in Israeli bonds overseas and pull the money back to Florida and use it to form a grant program for newlywed young couples in Florida so that they could take some of the money as a down payment towards their first home and start a family. But he ran as the anti-Israel candidate. He refused the AIPAC money. He refused big donor money as collectively and ran off of grassroots donations and support. Meanwhile, Byron Donalds, of course, being a career politician, is no stranger to as a politician to lobbyist money. He's already been funded by AIPAC in the past. He was funded again by them, by big tech. He was even funded by the Kalshi betting markets. Kalshi, of course, had James Fishback at just a 1% chance of winning all throughout the course of this past week. Well, Kalshi had donated $75,000 to Byron Donalds' campaign. The entire establishment was on Byron Donalds' side. And why is that? Because Byron Donalds was the guy who said there will be no AI data center bans. We need the data centers. Byron Donalds was the guy who said, I'm weary of flock cameras. This is a summary of what he said. I'm weary of flock cameras and we're going to look into it. James Fishback was the guy who said, no, the Everglades stay the Florida Everglades. The orange groves stay the orange groves. We're not giving up farmland to put data centers that are larger than strip malls down on the land. It ruins the farmland. It'll ruin the Everglades. It'll ruin Florida, and it serves no purpose other than feeding the machines. Farmland feeds people. AI data centers feed the machines. It makes no sense. Fishback pointed out he would ban flock cameras day one. No flock cameras in Florida. No data centers in Florida. Well, that's great, and he should have and did run the way that was appropriate. That's what we want a candidate to do. But in doing so, of course, he's not only not going to be not funded by big tech, but he's now their enemy. He talks about divesting $385 million of Floridian money away from Israel bonds and placing it back in Florida. He's now the enemy of Israel. Miriam Adelson rears her ugly head again, contributes to Byron Donalds' campaign. Big tech comes in, contributes to Byron Donalds' campaign. Kalshi betting markets comes in, contributes money to Byron Donalds' campaign. So much so that a new record, I believe, if I read this right, was broken again in this primary election with well over $110 million total dollars being spent on it. And not a penny of that went to James Fishback. In fact, James Fishback ultimately wound up being outspent by a 200-to-1 ratio in this all, and with no recognition name-wise prior to it either. Meanwhile, Byron Donalds received a fortune and was literally able to spend what comes to math-wise ultimately $145 per vote. This is what the math shows based off of the total votes Byron Donalds received comparatively to what he had funding him. $145 per vote. Fishback wound up only essentially spending $11 per vote. It's a massive difference. And here's the lesson in a lot of this too. And here's really what I'm pointing out here. I even said this on Twitter. The Chuds are not understanding the full circumstances here, I said. I'll even show you here. This is the post. The Chuds are not understanding the full circumstances here because they don't have the strategic and long-term thinking capabilities to be able to do so. I said this last night after Byron Donalds was clearly going to win. Byron Donalds received record amounts of money for his campaign. Dozens of Fox News appearances, 3 or more public and national endorsements by President Donald Trump, and after all of that, he still wound up receiving less than half of the Florida Republican vote, while simultaneously everyone is still actually talking about James Fishback. This is important to understand here. Byron Donalds wins, and people, of course, post that online, on social media, and they're sort of celebrating it. But what do they immediately say, more often than not in the same post? They talk about James Fishback, the guy who received 10.5% of the vote. Why do you think that is? And more importantly, what I also pointed out too was Byron Donalds received less than half of the vote in Florida. All of that money, all of that spending, and he couldn't even win with a majority. He won only with a plurality. That's significant, majorly significant. And people aren't going to fully understand that right now. They're just going to focus on the fact that James Fishback lost when they feel like he shouldn't have. Byron Donalds, the establishment pick backed by Trump 3 times, aired on Fox News literally dozens of times over the past year, and funded by the Adelsons, by big tech, by Kalshi, in the form of hundreds of millions of dollars. Literally, you can say that. And he still only got 47% of the vote. That is a silver lining worthy of note, because that is significant. That comes with significant future implications. Meanwhile, James Fishback is going on to now be projected to have won on every college campus precinct over Byron Donalds when it comes to Republicans on campus. It says, actually right here, this is a post by America First, a great follow on X. You can take a look at this. you can see what they're saying here. Despite having lost to Donalds and Collins, Fishback is likely on track to win younger voters outright and a plurality of the 18 to 34 demographic or similar young voting groups. Now, I have this chart pulled up as well. Ultimately, Donalds, according to this graph that was generated last night, this could actually change somewhat because it was narrow. When it comes to the under 35 crowd, James Fishback wound up receiving 30.8% of the votes. Byron Donalds did get the majority, or he did beat Fishback on this, but by less than 2%. Donalds had 32.6% of the votes over Fishback's 30.8%. And when it comes, of course, to the 55 and up crowd, this is where it paints the full picture. James Fishback only received 6.9% of the vote, while Byron Donalds received 53.7% of the vote. What this should tell you is that America First, the youth, is growing, while the opposition is literally dying out. That is at play right now. The signs are all there. The signs are all there in front of us. 10.5% is what people are pointing out, and they're calling it an abysmal performance. It's actually not. Not based off of what James Fishback started with, how this all went, what kind of movement he's built, the virality behind it online, the messaging. The fact that Fishback was able to start with no experience, no money, and no name recognition and put a 10.5% dent into the Florida primary is actually incredibly significant. All while, of course, watching the establishment pick backed by Trump not even get a majority and win off of only a plurality. That is incredibly significant and very telling, in fact. Remember something. Fishback ran as an extremist candidate, or what sadly is viewed as an extremist candidate, though he's actually more aligned with the founding fathers than perhaps any conservative candidate I've ever seen in my life. Fishback ran against Israel. He ran against big tech. He ran against AI surveillance. He ran in favor of Christ and putting Christian nationalism on the map as the main agenda and priority. He ran even on imposing a sin tax on OnlyFans models and on taxing all of the simps that subscribe to them. He ran outright against abortion with no compromise, the way conservatives used to run on that topic 25 and 30 years ago, before deciding, like in true conservative boomer fashion, to once again yield and submit to the Democrats in the form of compromise. Well, so long as it's before the 6-week mark, they say. Fishback ran on abortion is murder, it's illegal in Florida, Planned Parenthood is gone, I will defund it. Byron Donalds didn't do that. He ran in the establishment way and said, well, it's a medical procedure, there's the 6-month notion, and Planned Parenthood he didn't promise to defund it. There's a big difference between the two. And sadly, Fishback is viewed as the extremist candidate and still put the dent in at 10.5% while garnering so much attention from the youth, pulling a ton of support from the youth, winning on college campuses, drawing these massive crowds for a gubernatorial candidate of 2, 3, 4, 500 people waiting outside of a Denny's, going viral online. And in some ways, the virality is what I think made it seem like Fishback was coming in or going into this election with more support than he wound up getting, because you have to remember that virality on the internet, though the boomers say is not real, it not only is real, but increasingly more important than ever, first of all. But the reason why the boomers get to now sit there and say it's not real is because virality on the internet implies that you're a now national sensation. A lot of people support the idea of what Fishback ran off of, but they live in Alabama or Texas or New York or Connecticut or, Detroit or California or Washington. They're obviously not going to be able to vote for Fishback, but they follow him on social media. They comment and support under his stuff. They retweet everything he says. And so he has a lot more support nationwide, but still didn't have enough support statewide, is how it worked out. And we have to remember something. Florida may be a deep red state nowadays, but first of all, it wasn't always that way. It may not always stay that way now either. And in addition to that, it is the ultimate boomer con state, What is Florida filled with? It's filled with boomer conservatives who have aged out of living up north in Pennsylvania and New York and New England. You go down to Florida and you see a bunch of Buffalo Bills fans, New York Jets fans, you see a bunch of New York Giants fans, you see a bunch of Pittsburgh Steelers fans. That's because the boomers lived up in the northern states and they got tired of it. So they moved down to Florida where it's warm, and they're now conservative because they're old, and after living through the greediest period of time economically that any generation ever has, where they were liberal back then and stood for feminism and globalism, well, now they're strangely conservative because they want to keep their money, obviously, and profit off of the stock market. So they take their money, they take all of this crap, and they move down south to Florida. And that's what you also have to understand, because as I pointed out earlier, Fishback ran on not just Christian nationalism and not just on being an American nationalist and an American first candidate, but he even buckled down beyond that and ran as a Florida first candidate. He stood for ideas like no property tax for Floridian residents. But he did openly stand for ideas like if you're a dual resident and you own a home in Florida and New York, or you own a second home in Florida that's a vacation home, he ran on the idea of taxing those people. And maybe this was one of the errors that he made, though I appreciate the sentiment. I really do, actually. As a governor, it's like you should not only be a nationalist for America, but you should be a state nationalist to some degree, actually. I think that's not only endearing, but actually appropriate. But the problem with Florida is that's not the nature of what Florida is anymore. It's a vacation home to many Northerners. So they're not thrilled by that, even as Republicans. He ran on the idea of taking down the tolls, not taking them down permanently on the Florida turnpikes, but leaving them up and using them to toll outsiders, out-of-state vacationers, people that live in New York during the summer but come down to Florida in the winter. Well, obviously, again, he's not going to get support from them either. A lot of what's the actual pull on this? If they have residency in Florida and they can vote, then this becomes a problem. And by the way, not everyone does. So I'm not saying that this is the entirety of the problem, but it's estimated that 65.3% of Florida residents were not even born in the state of Florida. Because again, people go down there, they like it, they stay. But because they're not born there, Fishback running on Florida is for Floridians is kind of a turnoff to some of them. He pushed again for the state's like actual scenery to remain intact. He pushed against sort of this influx of outsiders, arguing that Floridians should be prioritized. If you're born in Florida, you shouldn't watch the houses be sold to people who live in Connecticut or Maine. So that's part of it. And I do want to point that out because a lot of people don't factor that in. And I do actually, if I'm being honest, I do think it was technically an error for James Fishback to run on that as strictly as he did. You want to pull as much support as possible, and you have to be aware of what the state culture is. And he ran on preserving what he grew up in. He always talked about growing up and driving down and watching driving through the citrus farms with his father. He's a fourth generation Floridian, James Fishback. So he was reminiscing about things the way any resident should. But his policies, of course, were very prohibitive in many ways to some of the outsiders who live in Florida, may have even declared Florida residency and therefore could vote in Florida, but we're never going to support that. Or people, like I said, it's estimated 65% of them came from another state and then lived in Florida. They weren't born and raised there. That makes a big difference, actually. And I did want to point that out. But beyond that, I really wanted to point out a little bit more here regarding Fishback on just essentially why last night was still such a win, but people won't be able to fathom it just yet. This is actually a fascinating article on this topic that came from Politico, actually, of all places. You can see the title. It says, James Fishback is probably about to lose. His politics might be winning. And it says he'll likely lose the Republican gubernatorial primary in Florida, but is he winning a larger war? The article goes on to say, it's unlikely Fishback's head-turning mad dash through Florida's political landscape will end in victory. Yet it's just as likely that should he lose, Fishback will go down as the most influential loser, which is kind of a funny term, but it's actually true, And it's not only true, but it's useful. In recent political history, one whose electoral blitzkrieg has appeared to mold a new political coalition of the disaffected and uninitiated. Uninitiated. There are glimpses of it taking shape. Take, for instance, the University of North Florida poll from February that revealed Fishback as the dominant preference for Florida voters under the age of 35. Here's the deal with this. In summary, a movement was born last night, and a lot of people aren't going to recognize that just yet because these movements, when they're born, they take time. And throughout the entirety of this, not to be a cringy nerd or doofus, but to be serious in some ways, a movement was born last night in Florida, a state with a lot of Jewish occupancy, a lot of boomers, and a lot of outsiders. And Fishback still put the 10.5% dent into the Florida electorate down there. He pulled over 170,000 voters. And in my mind, when I saw the result, I kept envisioning the moment from the movie 300. I know this gets a little cheesy, but bear with me on it. Xerxes at the end throws the spear. His words to Xerxes beforehand is that few will stand against many, and that even at the end, the world will know that a god king can bleed. He doesn't promise that he's going to kill Xerxes or topple the Persian Empire in the movie, in that line, in that quote. But what he does promise him is that a god king will bleed, and that few will stand against many, and that day will be remembered. This is written, of course. This is not what the Spartan king actually said. It's just what's in the movie. But nevertheless, I kept envisioning that moment last night. The spear is thrown, and it hits Xerxes, and it cuts him open, and he bleeds. But he is not dead. The establishment Persians lived on. They conquered the Spartans in that moment. They're all dead. But the God King is bleeding. And it put a dent into it. It changed the narrative. And people remembered that few stood against many. And it ultimately wound up aligning, at least in the movie, all of free Greece together to oust the Persians from their lands. The movement was born, but it didn't look that way in the movie. The Spartans lost. They're all dead. The spear missed. But it didn't fully miss. It did what it actually needed to do for the future. This is how things work, actually. Things aren't just born outright and just with the ultimate weight and backing behind them to succeed. That never works that way. And if you want to actually succeed in life in general, you have to be used to the bitterness of defeat first. I actually play that Teddy Roosevelt clip in the pre-show of my live here. Teddy Roosevelt. The credit goes to the man in the arena, not the naysayers, not the people who have a sneering pride and cynicism, who like to sit on the sidelines and criticize and laugh. The man in the arena gets the credit. There is no worse way to go about life than with a sneer, says Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt goes on to talk about, may your name never wind up with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory or defeat. He talks about how the credit goes to the man in the arena who dares greatly and strives for victory and either achieves success or what ultimately winds up becoming a second success. That's what's happening. This is biblical as well for anybody who believes in the Bible. You look throughout the history of what the Old Testament is, where God is anointing kings, and you understand something. God first appoints people to rise up as leaders. And he appoints all of us in our own way to rise up in the position of life that he wants us to rise up in and fulfill our purpose in glorifying him. We're all appointed by God in some varying degree if we're one of his disciples. But the appointment is always followed first by a disappointment. Disruption always follows intent. An appointment never is handed to you with the crown immediately. The appointment comes, and then the disappointment follows. King David was appointed by God first. Then he was relentlessly pursued by Saul for 20 years, where Saul relentlessly tried to kill him over and over and over again. David was on the run for decades, literally. In some ways starving, in some ways weak and feeble, totally dependent on God throughout the entirety of it. and not a king at all by any means. Everyone was actually against him for the most part. And then, only after the disappointment period was David finally anointed as the king of Israel. That's what it took. And that's just David. This is a pattern that follows every leader in the Bible predominantly. Appointment, disappointment, then anointment. And the same cycle and pattern follows every movement as well. We are in the disappointment phase right now. We've actually been in that disappointment phase since the start of Trump's second term, and hints of that were even made evident with the benefit of hindsight in Trump's first term, really. We just didn't really want to admit it back then. But Trump's second term, shy of just the first few months of it where he seemed like he was actually going to do it, Trump's second term began the disappointment phase that Republicans, America Firsters, are now living through. We're in it now. The appointment, in some ways, actually perhaps is MAGA. What will spring from what MAGA originally was intended to be will grow into a much more prominent, stronger, and incorruptible force known as America First. The youth are galvanizing out of the anger that they rightfully have, having watched President Donald Trump sell us up the river and betray the movement, betray the coalition. But MAGA in some ways is serving as the appointment of that. There was an appointment. It took place in 2015. And even MAGA didn't just come about randomly with full force. What came before MAGA? The Tea Party. And who gave way to the Tea Party? Well, in some ways, Ron Paul. And where's Ron Paul coming from? The libertarian movement. And when did that start? Well, truthfully, decades ago. And the libertarian movement had to endure time and time again all of the naysayers. Well, I love the libertarians, but a vote for them is a waste, so I can't, they always said. This is what a political movement actually looks like. This is what actual history looks like with the benefit of hindsight and with the correct view of it. You look back and you see the foundation that has been built and just how long it took. And that's not to be a doomer and to say that America First will take 30 or 40 or 50 years. I think it's actually coming soon. And by that I mean probably in 10 years. Which for some people might feel like too long, and other doomers might argue that is too long. Many people will sit here with the sneer that they have. They live their life with a sneer, the worst way possible, according to Teddy Roosevelt. And they'll tell you that America will be over. America will be over in 2028 if the Democrats regain control. That's what they'll tell you. And you're free to do that. You can go live about your life however you want. You can choose to take the black pill perpetually. I'll advise against that every single time, but I can't stop you from doing it. Be a defeatist. Be a coward. Cowardice is a gutless act. It takes courage to hope, but beyond that, it also takes intelligence to recognize strategy. The long game is what is being played now. You can't. The other thing too is when it comes to the long game, it's not just the Republicans or the America Firsters that are playing it. This kind of cycle repeats for everything, and success has a set of rules divinely created by God, but applicable to all forces, both good and evil. If you follow the rules of success, then you will succeed. And it doesn't matter what you actually stand for. Not from a success world standpoint. The Democratic Socialists have also been playing the long game as well, if you really stop to think about it. And we look back on, say, Bernie Sanders, for instance, and we recognize that. He's been around. He's been called a kook. He had a good chance of finally winning in 2015, 2016. And what did they do to him then? Well, if you're a Democratic Socialist, the disappointment of that election is very bitter for you, as you watched your candidate cuck out to Hillary Clinton and the establishment while actually having the possibility of succeeding. There's a little bit of parallel between that and James Fishback right now, I'd even say. Similar sort of extremist movement. People fear the Democratic Socialist and what comes with that. But nevertheless, Bernie Sanders was rising to prominence in 2016, but forced to cuck to Hillary. And it was a bitter moment. And for many people, they took a sigh of relief and they said, well, there goes Democratic Socialism. It had its chance and it's done. But erroneously so. Because now, fast forward 10 years from that, and where are we? We're at a period in time right now where democratic socialists are not only rising again, but they're already here. Zoran Mamdani is mayor of New York City, a democratic socialist. He appointed three more district congressional candidates that all won their elections. They're democratic socialists, they ran against Israel, and they're in positions of power, or at least about to be taking them since it's New York soon. He then also mentioned and supported a Colorado candidate who was a 28-year-old female Democratic Socialist candidate that won her primary over the 30-year incumbent Democrat boomer who supports Israel, of course, because she's a boomer. She lost after 30 years. She held the office longer than the Democratic Socialist candidate had been alive. And within one cycle, it's gone, and the Democratic Socialist is the primary winner. And we're seeing it still continue to play out even last night. Even last night and continually. They play the long game, the Democrats. That's what they're good at. That's how they wind up always going from what seems like the bottom of the barrel. They go from this position of, being called out as crazy and an unviable pick. And somehow, always, within just a few short years usually, they're back on top over the conservatives. MAGA came in and it did what it needed to do, and it made Democrats both uncool, politically correct nonsense the Democrats are. Well, MAGA exposed that, and MAGA took over the culture, and for the first time in probably ever, Republicans were cool for a period. That's gone now. Trump sold MAGA up the river, and everything that MAGA does is now culty and cringy. And the Republicans just haven't figured it out. They're behind, as they always find themselves being behind. So much so that they reject the youth of America. They're rejecting the youth because the youth is getting more so behind people like James Fishback. So MAGA and Republicans are relying on boomers still, and boomers are dying. They're all dying. 2028 will be foundational in demonstrating this. 2028 will be the landmark year. This year in some ways will be. But 2028 will be a landmark year for the tide turning. Boomers will be the minority for the first time after 2028's elections. So it's all ahead of us still. All of it. And some of the other elections last night actually demonstrate this. One of the things we have to be aware of, first of all, and this was a tweet from, I'm actually going to show this tweet because I want to support the channel, the guy's page here, right here. This is Mark Mitchell. He actually quit his job at Rasmussen Reports, one of the most accurate pollsters out there, but sadly seems to have gone astray in this Trump second term. Rasmussen is essentially taking Trump PAC money to put out more favorable polls for President Trump, according to Mark Mitchell here. And Mark Mitchell, I had known about this actually long before, but I swore to Mark Mitchell that I wouldn't expose it because he was still working for Rasmussen, and I was talking with him in his DMs, and I said I wouldn't do it. So Mark Mitchell, full of integrity, he left. He now has his own polling company. He's the Honest Pollster. You should go follow him on X at Honest Pollster and follow his new YouTube channel. But he updated this today, or technically yesterday now. The Republican Florida primary turnout, 2018, 35%, 2022, 33%, 2026, 31%. That's getting more and more grim, not better. And why? Because the youth want Fishback, but the establishment doesn't. And so the establishment is rejecting the youth. And as a result, the turnout is getting lower. The boomers are also dying as well. Boomers are who predominantly vote in this nation. 75% of boomers vote. The margins of who votes in the youth is abysmal. That number needs to get better, by the way. And from now on, in some ways, that's what this channel will hopefully exist to do, to encourage people to vote. Young people to vote, I should say. But that's what those polling numbers reflect. It reflects a party that's dividing before your very eyes. And this is actually a good thing, at least in the long run. Additionally, too, I wanted to point this out. People were pointing out that Dana Foster in the Democrat primaries in Florida wound up receiving 15% of the votes despite only having raised $30,000. And she's a Democratic socialist. Now, David Jolly wound up outperforming her significantly so, but again, the Democrats are on a similar path here. Also, there was news that came in regarding the Pennsylvania 12th District here. This is another one. This is the district that represents Butler, Pennsylvania, where President Donald Trump was literally almost assassinated. And he obviously performed very well in Pennsylvania to become president 2 years ago. And you can see right here, this took place last night. Republicans unexpectedly lose the Pennsylvania State House 12th District special election located in Butler County, PA, where Trump's assassination attempt occurred and where Trump won by 19 points. It's now a Democrat that won in the special election. You can see right here, actually, this is the news. This is the article written on this. Make sure that that's framed better for everybody. Let's see. Does that help? Yeah. It says Pennsylvania Democrats secured a shocking win ahead of November's midterm elections after Democrat candidate Brandon Dukes of Butler County flipped the State House District 12 in a special election against Republican Scott Timko on Tuesday. The district was previously carried by more than 18% by President Donald Trump in 2024. Tuesday's results have big implications for Democrat candidates in races across the Commonwealth in November. With 99% of votes counted, Dukes held 50.26% of the votes. Once Dukes is sworn into the House in September, the body will have 103 Democrats and 100 Republicans. Though Dukes and Timko will face off again in November for a full term, this will mark the first time Democrats have surpassed 102 seats since they won control of the chamber in 2022. Not only that, but I also wanted to point out this as well. This is the next one right here. This was Alaska, and I was watching this. And I'm pointing all of this out to get to a main point here. So bear with me 1 second longer. Alaska, I kept my eyes on this one. 88% was reporting at the time of this photo being taken, and Mary Peltola was leading Dan Sullivan, who's the Republican candidate, in the primary vote. 48 to 42%. Now, fast forward to today, the Democrat won up in Alaska. What does all of this mean? Why am I pointing all of this out? Well, I'm pointing it out for a very distinct reason. Movements take time. That's first of all. And to go back to what I was saying, just like MAGA took time, MAGA had to be sprung from what was the Tea Party, and before that we had other movements before it, and Ron Paul associated, and who was it? I see Kono Tree in there, Pat Buchanan. I own some of his books. Pat Buchanan is America First in the conservative side. Ralph Nader. Okay, fair enough. Regardless, these movements took time. And what took ultimately several years to build MAGA has now been destroyed by Trump himself. And the Republican Party is fracturing and splintering, and from these ashes that will be the Republican Party after the 2026 midterms finish destroying the Trump administration, will rise the America First movement. It's just going to take time, and you have to understand that what led up to years worth of work that led up to the MAGA coalition led by Trump has now been underway for the last decade. MAGA, in some ways, you could accurately say, sort of became the establishment. Not at first because it was corrupt, but ultimately it is corrupt now, and it is just the establishment. Meanwhile, what took its first defeat back in 2016 with Bernie Sanders, its first major national defeat, has now re-risen to prominence over the course of 10 years of the Democrats playing the long game under Trump. And we had the little break where Biden was president, but that's pretty insignificant in truth. The Democratic Socialists are now here. They will now be rising to power and prominence. This is reality. And I mentioned this in the past, these patterns that play out. Trump, almost ironically, said that he didn't want to be remembered as Herbert Hoover is remembered, the Republican president who was in power when the Great Depression destroyed America. And I pointed that out last time, and I said it's almost appropriate that he says that, because it looks like he might wind up being remembered like a Herbert Hoover. And America's economy might pop, and the bubbles might burst. And what came after that? FDR, who was truthfully the first socialist president. We saw the New Deal issued in under FDR. We saw Social Security issued in under FDR. Socialist policies became sort of normal and baked into our economy because of Franklin Roosevelt, the first socialist candidate and first socialist president. And it was all because a Republican was in power prior to him and the economy went to shit. And it ruins the Republican name. Momentum is destroyed, it rises up somewhere else. We're seeing that now. It took years to build MAGA. MAGA ran its course. It's now fizzling out. It will end with Trump because Trump is MAGA. Trump has also betrayed MAGA, which has destroyed a lot of momentum. The Democratic Socialists, they've been playing the long game since the rise of Trump. Their time is now approaching. Trump will be like Hoover. The Democratic Socialists will rise. The Democrats will take power back. My projection to you, my prediction, is not one you're going to like. And I hope I'm wrong. In some ways, I hope I'm wrong. In other ways, I think it needs to run its course. But my projection, of course, is that the Democrats are going to annihilate the Republicans in the midterms, and they deserve to. Not because the Democrats deserve power, but because the current establishment GOP doesn't deserve that power. And it doesn't represent us. And allowing this monstrosity of an establishment GOP to have the power is the reward that it doesn't deserve. And so allowing it to have the power doesn't do us any benefit. It actually works to our detriment. It rewards all of the corrupt, non-representative policies that it pursues. We don't vote for a managed decline in this country. We vote to make America great again. That was what MAGA was supposed to be about. We vote to not only preserve our nation, but to make it better. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that's the challenge America is willing to accept. That's the JFK pre-show segment I have on this show for a reason. That's what America's supposed to be. And voting for the Republicans currently, as they currently are, this disgusting establishment, not only won't get us that, it'll get us the opposite, which makes them in truth no better than Democrats. That's just the reality of it. So they don't deserve the power. The Democrats, we don't want them to have it, but they're going to take it. Because in truth, they've played the game correctly now, and it's their time to rise again. It's going to make things worse, but in doing so, a new movement will be born. The movement that rises from the ashes that will be MAGA. And it's sadly, in my opinion, it's going to take all the way through 2026. And I'm hoping that the midterms going blue will be enough of a wake-up call for conservatives to still maintain the executive office in 2028. With what will have to be a dark horse candidate, since J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio are not viable options. But if we're being real and we're being realistic, that's almost a non-certainty. That's almost a guaranteed. The opposite is guaranteed. They're going to try to run Rubio probably. He's going to fail miserably. It'll be Newsom or John Ossoff or AOC. Let's just call a spade a spade. That's what we're looking at. And things will get even worse. And then maybe they get reelected in 2032, and things will get even worse. Who knows how bad? We can only speculate. But for every reaction, there is an equal and opposite reaction. That's where America First will come in. That's just what it's going to be. It took Weimar Germany to get the leader that almost conquered the world. Subsequently and comparatively in the opposite sense, it took Herbert Hoover to get FDR. We're in the Herbert Hoover phase right now. We have dark days ahead of us. I don't know how bad they're going to get, but be prepared. Be as prepared as you can be. But simultaneously never give up hope either. America is supposed to be a country filled with people who embody the fighting spirit. And we must be ready for that. And this is how we need to be looking at this. 10.5% for a nobody is not insignificant. It's actually the opposite. It's significant. They're still talking about James Fishback today. Not because they're making fun of him. They want you to think they're making fun of him. And in some ways they are. That's the appearance they're putting on. But the reason why they're doing it is a sigh of relief. Because they saw in Fishback what they don't want. They don't actually want true conservatism. They want their compromised, moderate candidates, which really leads me to the other point that I wanted to make in all of this, which is that If democratic socialists are going to be a thing in this country, and it looks like they're going to be, then for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. We must also get more extreme and further right. You can't counter far left extremism with the moderates or the independents, with any sort of compromised center road type of mindset. In fact, we're at a point right now where the Democratic Socialists are already recognizing this with their moderate Democrats. The Republicans are yet to do that. We're at a point right now where the center, the dead center must be persuaded and sold, but it is the moderates. They're not quite center, but they're not on our side either. They're going to be a big problem. Hakeem Jeffries can't stand the fact right now that Democratic Socialists are anti-Israel. But you'll watch and see how the Democratic Socialists deal with somebody like Hakeem Jeffries. He'll either fall in line or he'll just disappear from the political landscape altogether. When Democrats choose change, nothing stops it. And even if there's a little bit of infighting at first, they ultimately get on the same picture one way or another. They weed out those who are not compatible anymore, and they move forward always. And where they're heading is socialism. That's their goal. Nothing will stop that. It's inevitable. And all of the Democrat moderates who stand in the way will either be replaced or they'll be forced to submit and get on board. However, on the right-wing side of the aisle, it's the moderate Republicans that moral fag over compromising. They live to compromise. And the truth of the matter is, when it comes to morality especially, compromising is a sin. Compromising is defeat. And on this channel, at least, we recognize the fact that the reason why the horseshoe political theory is not real is because of social issues, aka morality. Both sides may agree more so than ever on Israel when it comes to the youth, but morality still divides the parties. So compromise, therefore, is a loss. And it will be the moderate Republicans who will insist on compromise. 6-week abortions, all good. Gay marriage, that's okay. Look where it's gotten us. 6-week abortions turn into an advocacy for late-stage abortions. Gay marriage turns into transgenders giving lap dances to school children and pushing for pornographic material to be in their libraries. Compromise only leads one way. And the Democratic far left will never compromise back with us, ever, on anything. And once you give them the ground, it becomes harder to take it back. Feminism doesn't compromise. It silences, it destroys. Globalism doesn't compromise. It silences, it destroys. So that's what we have to be aware of. That's what's important here. That's why James Fishback was such a white pill. He was such a clear pill. He came in, he acknowledged the plight of the white Christian man in America. We haven't heard a politician ever say that. He came in, he acknowledged the fact that Christianity was meant to govern these lands, and it provides the morality needed to preserve them. He came in and he recognized that ultimately the AI surveillance system, which Trump is ushering in, Byron Donalds will compromise on now, he came in and recognized it violates the Fourth Amendment. It has no place here in this country. Flock cameras, it has no place here in this country. He came in and he recognized the devastation that is caused by pornography, seeking to sin tax the OnlyFans girls and charge the simps that pay for them. He recognized all of it, and he was unyielding on any of it. He refused the AIPAC money, the big donor money, and he ran grassroots, and he stuck to his principles. And it's not because he was running to be a beautiful loser like Republicans are always framed as. It's because he was running to re-interject the appropriate narrative back into the discourse of the right wing. That is what has been sorely missing. That is what the youth recognizes over the cucked ballless boomers who compromised on all of this shit throughout the course of their lives, who were afraid to identify themselves as race realists or as Christian nationalists or as anything else. That is what is significant about Fishback, pulling in the youth and demonstrating that there is an appetite for this movement. The strategies may not have been perfect, and what is sorely actually missing right now is not James Fishback being in the right state to win, because he wasn't. That's ultimately what this comes down to. Too many boomers, Too many boomers, too many Jews in Florida. That's the reality. Look at the demographics. That's not Fishback's fault, though. He's a Florida native. He's been a fourth-generation Floridian. He can and should rise up and run in his state, and I hope to see him back. I beg for Fishback to stay relevant and stay active in the political scene. We need him. But what we also need is about 700 more James Fishbacks, because at this point, it's actually a numbers game. Like I explained earlier, Fishback was an internet sensation. That's how we know there's an appetite for him. The problem is, being an internet sensation doesn't mean you're a state sensation. It's not a concentrated enough number in Florida, clearly, we know that. But that doesn't mean that in every county or district or state that's not the case. We just need more people rising up and running like Fishback everywhere across America. And it's a numbers game from there. Most will lose, some will win. And with that, we gain momentum. That's what's to be on the look. That's what we need to be on the lookout for, and that's the strategy going forward. Time is on our side right now. Truthfully, the movement is young and it's aging in right now. 22-year-olds are idiots. They don't vote. I even saw a mom on Twitter last night depressingly say this. Both my children, aged 22 and 25, were so avid for Fishback. They stayed home today and played video games. It's like, okay, well, thank you. You raised failures for sons. But it's not new. That's the youth. And that is the one issue of appealing to the youth. They don't vote for you. So we've got to change that too. But inevitably, those people with that mindset are aging into the political system. In my 30s, I'm more focused on politics than ever. When I was 22, I was an idiot. Not really. I've always been smarter than most people, especially everybody in chat. But I was, focused on other things. I was 22. They're aging in. And that 22-year-old in 10 years is going to be 32, with a much different view on the world and much angrier than he is now, having experienced more of the world and just how pathetic these parties are. And that's what we're staring down the barrel of, the future. The future is Fishback. The future is America first. Time is on our side. Things are not going to get better right now before they get... things are going to get worse before they get better. First comes the appointment, like with King David. Then comes the disappointment, like with David literally starving and on the run from Saul, murderous Saul, for 20 years of his life before ultimately being handed the crown. It takes time. Appointment, disappointment, then anointment. Disruption always follows intent. That's a biblical law. That's what we're in right now. We are in the disappointment phase. So you better develop an appetite for losing, because we're going to be losing a whole lot more. Learn to like it. Learn to let it make you angry. Anger is more useful than despair. Don't take the doomer pill. Don't take the black pill. Your despair is pathetic, and it's not the nature of man. Certainly not the nature of a Christian man. We're not only allowed to have hope, but hope is what we run off of because we have faith. So that's my messaging regarding James Fishback. There was a lot of good signs. There were a lot of good signs last night to look at. A lot of hope to be found. You just have to know how to view this correctly. And most people aren't going to be able to, but that's why I just said what I needed to say. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Please be sure to like the stream if you haven't already. Double tap your phone screens, hit the thumbs up button. It's free to do, and it does encourage YouTube's algorithm to push this show out to more people who need to see this. Also, of course, be sure to subscribe to American Advocates, especially if you agreed with what I was saying in that second segment. You're the exact kind of viewer that we want coming back every single day that I'm live. You're what we need. Other than that, I will take a look at some of the chats here, and I am going to talk about Linsay Clancy, but tomorrow. It's getting late, and I am starving. I'm really fucking hungry. But I want to talk about Linsay Clancy because this whole movement. Yeah, I don't even want to talk too much about it because I'll literally go off right now. But this whole Linsay Clancy thing is out of control. Women are out of control. The movement must be young men when it comes to this whole Fishback convo, because the women, they're crazy. They're literally... I've never seen anything like this. I mean, she murdered her 3 children, and now she has like a GoFundMe that's raised $800-something thousand from women. Fucking disgusting. Women need less rights. We gotta repeal the 19th Amendment. They need less rights. They should be relegated to the home, subjugated under their husbands. They definitely shouldn't be allowed to vote. And the more the time goes on, the more I'm convinced of all of that. But I'll get into that tomorrow. I don't have time. I'm starving. I'll take a look at the chats, though. I see Kono Tree and CTG are very active in the horizontal chat here. And I'll see what you guys are saying also in the vertical chat as well. Give me 1 second. Let me click off all these tabs, too. Slowing down my internet, probably. All right. What are you guys saying? Oh, here's a guy. Your name's popping up too much. I don't like it. Farewell. You look like an idiot. I'm not even gonna read the chats. I just see the username with like 3 words per chat, and it's like, oh yeah, you're just an idiot. You're so far beneath me. It's not even worth keeping somebody like that in the chat. Dead weight. I usually like using the swine and the cattle in chat. You guys are great for signal boosting. Most of you are really stupid and really otherwise useless to me, but your presence and your chat and your view, they do serve me well. So most of you are permitted to stay, but sometimes it's just like I click on there. Clearly I don't have any moderators in this chat tonight. It's like, yeah, just get fucked. Waste of space. Lightning Fish Production says, do you think we should reduce Social Security for high receivers, add an income cap, payout cap, asset cap to receive? I know, dude, he says 40 trillion. I know, we hit the $40 trillion national debt mark today. And Social Security, if you're financially, I am not a financial channel. I will start off by saying that. But I will also say I've looked into it, and I look at the debt clock frequently, obviously, and you see what some of the biggest problems are. Military spending, Social Security. Here's the deal. I've always been an extremist about Social Security, and people don't like it, especially the boomers. And a part of me is sadistic enough to wish that it would all go away and collapse with the boomers still alive, because I just despise their generation. Not individually. You always talk with boomers individually, and at least a good portion of them wind up being pretty cool, to be honest with you. I love boomers individually, but generationally speaking, I despise them. And I'll just say this. I'm very extreme about it, and I think the only conclusion that is appropriate, sadly, and I say this about everything, actually, and not just Social Security, but everything that's wrong with our country. We have to start with the acknowledgement that it all went awry during the boomers, and we look at the reason why. Greed. Greed is what ruined all of this. The boomers voted for it. They embodied the greed is good saying, literally. They championed that. And they voted and acted as such. They sold all of our stuff overseas to China production-wise. The jobs are gone. The quality is worse, etc. And everything, it's no different with Social Security, because Social Security is failing. It's literally going to fail. The worker to retiree ratio when Social Security was instituted in the late 30s, I think it was conceived in the 30s and maybe instituted in the 40s, right? Regardless, the worker to retiree ratio used to be something like 42-1. So it was easy. Then the problem comes where the boomers sell all of our shit overseas to China in the 80s, 90s, especially the 90s, right? That's the heyday of all of that. Well, the jobs go away. The jobs with good benefits go away. It becomes harder to make a living, etc. People are contributing less or not having the benefits, etc. And we change what we are from a producing nation to a consumer nation. And in addition to all of that, over the course of the decades that follow, and we really start to see the decline of America hit in the 50s to some degree. JFK talks about it on his campaign trail when he's running against Nixon in the 60s. And every decade since Social Security has been implemented, the retiree to worker ratio has dropped off a cliff. It's steadily declined to the point of where it is under a 2-to-1 ratio. So it's no longer sustainable. And in some ways, it actually even demonstrates the inevitability of socialism failing. However you want to think about that or disagree with me on that, feel free, but that's where we're at. It's not sustainable because there aren't enough workers in the workforce to sustain it, straight up. So some generation now is going to have to just be the selfless generation that admits it, acknowledges it, and actually does something about it. I think that's going to be stuck on the millennials and the Gen Zers. We're going to have to be the generation, because we're almost guaranteed that we won't have the benefit of Social Security anyway. We're going to have to be the generation, unlike the selfish, greedy, and entitled worst generation of all time in America, the boomers, who will literally to this day, despite fucking up everything good about America, will sit there and tell you that it's our problem to deal with. They don't care. They're just hoping to die before it collapses. And most importantly, just don't touch my Social Security, they say. There's no fight in them left. There's no ounce of respect to be given to them, and rightfully so. They are cowards, pussies, cucked, everything bad about them imaginable. That's what they are. They are stupid beyond all recognition, beyond all belief. That's what the boomers are, and that's all they care about. They don't care about their children. They're the generation that devoured their children. They don't care about their grandchildren even. We will have to be different. And this will be the hardest thing to accept for millennials and Gen Zers, but we will have to be the generations, both of us. And we'll have to form and this is what I always say. I am technically a millennial, but I'm on the youngest end of the spectrum in my early 30s. I always said this growing up because it was my generation that took all the shit from the boomers at first. We've been the umbrella of that to Gen Z in some ways. Now the Gen Zers hate the boomers too, and rightfully so. But the millennials ate all of it first. I was told when I was 12 that I was a selfish, entitled piece of shit and that there's something wrong with my generation. And I was like, excuse me, sir, I'm in 8th grade math class. What do you mean? Like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not even out in the workforce yet. What do you mean I'm selfish, entitled, and there's something wrong with me? With the benefit of hindsight, we now know that was just narcissistic projection from the worst generation of all time. They knew they fucked it up, but millennials are the scapegoats for that. It's not our fault, but we're dealing with it now. And unlike the boomers, who don't care to deal with it, can't face the facts, won't acknowledge any of it, and will insist on dying with the benefits, it will have to be the millennials and Gen Zers who form a coalition. I'll never talk down on Gen Z ever. Maybe on the women, they're horrible. But Gen Z men, those are warriors, and I really respect and appreciate them, and you can see the fighting spirit in them. And a lot of the millennial men are waking up, the older ones. The younger ones are already here. I'm a younger one. I'm already here. I relate much more with Gen Z than millennials. But we're here, and we'll have to form the coalition generationally. We can't speak ill of each other. We must work together. There will be no more boomer patronizing or disparaging. Not from me as a millennial to Gen Z. I think Gen Z men are some of the coolest guys you'll ever hope to meet. They've already figured out a lot of life earlier because they have to. They've had to deal with different stressors that boomers can't even fathom. And despite all of that, they somehow wind up being pretty well-rounded and even-keeled, and I really respect that. We're going to have to come together, and we're going to have to eat all of it. That's the reality. Social Security is a good example of this. We're going to have to look at everything that went wrong, all of the benefits that are disappearing, and we're going to have to just admit and acknowledge that not only are we not going to be able to benefit from it at all, but we're also going to have to lose even more in order to save this nation and put forth the new establishment that will benefit Gen Alpha and Gen Beta after them. We're going to have to be essentially, in some ways, not to LARP, but essentially in some ways we're going to be the martyrs. And there's almost no way around it. We're going to have to eat the shit sandwich, and we're going to have to learn to love it. And we're going to have to, unlike the generations prior to us, we're going to have to learn to embrace a real generational legacy and focus all of our priorities on that. Establishing the fact that, yeah, our lives are kind of gonna suck monetarily for the most part, and we're gonna have a lot of hardships to endure that Gen X to the largest degree, but especially boomers, will never have to endure. That's just how it is. But in doing so, we can set up America and save it, and hopefully reset it up to be successful for future generations. That's the reality. That's how I view it. That's what's in store for us. And maybe we set it up quick enough or successfully enough to benefit from it later on in life, in our 50s and 60s and 70s. But we're just not going to be able to live the same life that the boomers lived. That's just how it is. Time is flying, if you haven't noticed. I could blink and feel like it was just yesterday that I was, in my early 20s. I'm not. I'm in my early 30s now. Jim Sconfelder says 16.7 to 1 for Social Security. Not currently though. The ratio for Social Security right now, I believe, is 1.5 to 1. I'm gonna literally search that right now to be sure, but I researched this many months ago. I could be okay, I'm a little off. It says the current ratio of workers to retirees is approximately 2.9. 2.9. That's only going to keep going down. I mean, AI. You think AI? What? You think AI is going to take jobs and invest money in Social Security for humans? Do you think Indians coming here who eat shit and throw trash in their rivers that are taking our jobs are going to invest in Social Security? They're probably going to get paid under the table or whatever else. They're not even citizens here. So that number's not going to go up, that's for sure. Boomers are the problem, says our homeboy Goose. Yeah, they are. They were. They're still sort of a problem too, but that problem is going to solve itself in the next several years here. They're finally dying off. You guys can't figure out which bathroom to use. I have a penis, sir, and I'm a man, and there's two genders. Does that help out for you? Well, I don't know what kind of channel you think this is. People always think I'm a liberal channel. Like, yeah, believe it or not, I'm a conservative with standards. I know that's not common nowadays. I'm like a reactionary conservative. I'm infinitely more conservative than you could ever even imagine, you little cuck. Here we go, too. We were forced to pay into Social Security. It came about 100 years ago, you moron. Yeah, you're just tuning in. I literally just gave the history of that. We were forced to pay into it. Therefore, I have what's coming to me. Well, what do you think? What do you think my generation was forced to do? How do you reckon that one? We were forced to pay into it, too. And you know what we're being told? Well, that program's going to be coming to an end in 2036. What does that mean for us, then? You fucking little pleb. We were forced to pay into it. That's my money. What do you say to us then? This is what I mean too. This is a boomer, right? This NB117 guy. This is a boomer. This is how they sound. They have no comprehension of capabilities. They're idiots. Boomers were simpletons. They grew up and they were told to get a factory job and to work it for 40 years and to have a family. They grew up being born on third base economically, and they feel like they're winners because of that. They grew up on third base with the best real estate markets in the 80s and a roaring economy throughout. And they think they're winners because of that. They think they have the know-it-all and the smarts to patronize the millennials and Gen Zers and tell us how to succeed. They were born literally with the silver spoon on third base. And what's more pitiful is many of them couldn't even, in that circumstance, make it to home plate. Some of them are still not only on third base, but they're back on second and first base, begging for us to not get rid of their entitlements. They were born with the best stock market, housing market, and economy America has ever seen. They did nothing to build it. It was all of their parents and grandparents who built it. They inherited it. They ruined it. And they didn't even profit off of it enough, some of them. Some of them will literally say, don't take away my Medicare and Social Security. I can't live without that. I need that $3,000 a month check. I don't know what I'll do without it. The fuck were you doing in the 80s? Smoking weed and having fucking sex with women who weren't shaving their legs? You hippie scum? Absolute retards. They literally deserve to be homeless. They're that dumb. Am I ready for the AI White House? No, I'm not. Our homeboy Goose says they were born on third base and think they hit a triple. Exactly. Yep. David Solomon says, MB, you're a lolliennial. Wait, what did he say, MB? He says, I'm a millennial? Oh, see, that's disgusting. And I don't even believe you, first of all. You sound like a boomer. This is the problem that I do have with my own generation. I won't patronize Gen Z. They're awesome. Well, patronize Gen Z women. They're whores. They're fucking scum. Stop getting tattoos. Fucking take accountability for your actions, you fucking Gen Z whores. But the Gen Z men are great. Millennials, however, are split. The millennials are split. If they're like 40 and they're married, most of them are absolutely gay retards. And this just shows with this guy right here. You're just a nut job who blames everyone else for your problems. How's your life going there, NB117? Your wife fuck you every night still? Or does she have a headache every night now? How many divorces you've been through? Did she take the house yet? How's the housing market for you, MB? Trump was the biggest failure in American presidential history. I voted for Trump to keep Hillary out of the White House. He's everything she promised to be. I don't fully agree with that, but the sentiment I appreciate and I can get behind entirely. I do think there actually might still be worse presidents than Trump, but he's cutting it close. And by the end of his term, I might actually fully agree with you. So he's definitely going to be in the top 5 worst of all time. He came in wanting to be like Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln. You know, he touts off all of these badass presidents. And then it's like, no, actually, you're going to be Jimmy Carter and Herbert Hoover. Truman. You know, it's like, it's bad. It's bad. Oh, all right, guys. Well, hey, I appreciate all you guys for being here. Like I said, be sure to subscribe to American Advocates if you haven't already. Double tap your phone screens, hit the thumbs up button. It's free to do. It does help encourage YouTube's algorithm to push this show out. And stop everything. What have we got here? Is this a $5 super chat from The Ghost? Is that what I'm seeing? In the horizontal chat here, The Ghost with a $5 super chat tariff. He doesn't even say anything. He just sent the $5. I see he's been in the chat now. He says, dang, bro, is still going. Yeah, but you're on the ass end of it now, The Ghost. TC says they will raise the age to collect Social Security to 70. Well, they'll do that first, and then they'll raise it even higher to like 73, and then they'll just have to like cancel it. They'll just do like a payout, which will put us in more debt nationally. But they'll do like a payout, and we won't get all of the money back, and then they'll say, well, that's going to have to be good enough. CTG says, does anybody seriously believe Social Security benefits will be available by 2030? I think they'll still be around in 2030, but I think by the mid-2030s, they're gone. I think it's literally just gone. Howard Clegg says, oh, he's saying The Ghost. Appreciate you. Good to see you're still here, Howard Clegg. Howard Clegg is one of our cool boomers, too. This is a guy that's raised his children and grandchildren, and to some degree will, because Howard's going to live for another 20 years at least. He's going to raise his great-great-grandchildren now very well. And Howard, we're going to get you in the Discord server. I'm going to do the Discord server. I'm going to do an episode where I talk with Howard, the Chief Warrant Officer for Army Targeting, 39-year veteran officer of the Army. That's an actual good boomer for you right there. Back to the vertical chat real quick. Rise up, Gen Zoomers. Amen. Amen. And just know a lot of us millennials are not as retarded as MB117. We're with you. We're with you, and we've been waiting for the power that is rising up in Gen Z. We've been waiting for that. Circumcision is yes. Well, hey, take that up with the Jews. Circumcision. Trump will win in 2028. Nice rage bait. He lied about wars. He lied about the debt, fuel prices, and the housing market. Yeah. Can you opt out of Social Security? Can you? I think there are ways around that. Yeah. I think you can, actually. It depends on how you get paid. Because now, when I worked a normal job, yeah, I wasn't, I was paying into it. But I'm a business owner now. And I'm a business owner, and I'm not employed, technically, as a result. I'm the employer in some ways. But in other ways, I'm still earning money. And it's not going into Social Security. So, which makes me very happy, of course. So there are ways to go about everything where you're not paying into it, I guess. but it depends on what you're doing. If you're an if you're a 9-to-5er, then you probably can't. I don't think you can opt out of it, but. All right. Anyways, guys, that's going to do it for me. The vertical chat is still filled with swine who I don't cast pearls to. They're not worth it. They're beneath me. Horizontal chat, good as always. There are some cool vertical chatters, though, too. Our homeboy Goose, appreciate you. Some cool ones out here. Some cool ones, appreciate you guys. Other than that, though, guys, listen, have a great rest of your evening. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Subscribe, like the stream. Glory to America. God bless the USA, the best nation on earth by far still, and we're going to save it. Not the boomers. They're tapped out, they're stupid, they're tired, they're old, they're greedy, they're selfish, they're incapable of greatness. But the younger millennials and the Gen Z men are rising up now, and it will take several more years, but we're going to get there. America first is inevitable. We are coming. The future is coming. Time is on our side. We will save America. We will tear down the greedy, disgusting institutions that the boomers built in this fourth turning. And in its place will rise up what this nation should always be about. It will come from us. We are coming. We can't be stopped. Be patient. Don't take the black pill. Don't take the doomer pill. Glory to America. God bless the USA. And may God bless all of you. May God bless America and all of you as well. Have a great rest of your evening. See you back here live tomorrow. Bye-bye.
There are too many minorities. Too many. At my water park. Somebody do something. Where did they all come from? Why can't they leave this land alone? And it's such a tragedy. Feel bad like dying. We look the other way too long. We've got to change our priorities and get all these minorities out of my water park.